functioning, what is the kind of social situation which is being created, formulated, reconfigured on a day-to-day basis, and what is the policy interaction that is happening between institutions, and therefore a great interest in this discipline. In fact, in order to respond to this particular, the whole set of challenges that that our country and indeed the global, scenario faces at this point of time, the School of Public Policy and Governance has evolved a curriculum which is very, very unique. It is something that moves seamlessly between the practice and the theoretical aspects of public policies, connecting the dots between what is taught in the classrooms to what people live and experience in their daily lives. At our school, the students incubate ideas, they participate in research and engage with data as they evolve as seasoned policy professionals who have their hands completely soiled in a very realistic understanding of the social situation in the country. If you look at the curriculum framework of this particular course, it provides foundational understanding of some key disciplines, which includes ethics, economics, political science, sociology, and law. What it also does is that this enables the students to understand public policy from multiple lenses, rooted in the disciplinary moorings, while also appreciating the interconnectedness between all of these. What the students also get to do is a lot of hands-on things. They read policies, they read court judgments, they try to interpret these judgments, and these court judgments are not just something which happened, 20 years back. It could be something that happened, last week or even yesterday. So we are extremely contemporary. We respond to the situations as they emerge and evolve around us. All of this while remaining rooted in the commitment to the values of a just and equal social order. When we talk about School of Public Policy and Governance, what comes to the mind at the very first thing is that unique pedagogy with enormous amount of innovation, continuous evolving of the course content structure, and the way it responds to the emerging realities. One of the innovations that the school offers in terms of the course content and structure are the policy area concentrations. These policy area concentrations are actually specializations that enable the students to actually specialize in one of the areas which are offered by the school for its prospective students. The three available policy area concentrations include a study of regulations and institutions, urbanization, social conflict, and public policy. You see the colorful reports below. So each of these have been, there are actually several more, and these have been developed by our students who have been working on their dissertations, which are also formulated as a part of their policy area concentrations. Remember that this policy area concentration builds students' capacities through classroom lectures, through field immersions, and through internships with policy institutions. Another landmark activity of great significance is the Public Policy and Good Governance Labs, an initiative that has been started first by the School of Public Policy and Governance. The objective, as you can understand, is to forge a relationship with the government, corporate, and other non-state actors. The students actually work with the agencies, as mentioned here. In this year, we have had students working with the Department of Women's Development and Child Welfare, Government of Telangana, with the National Institute of Urban Affairs in New Delhi, and with the District Administration of Jalandhar in Punjab. So all the students actually across the different concentrations, they are located in these departments and in these agencies. They work with them, trying to understand what are the issues that these agencies are grappling with, engage in research that actually help these agencies take informed decisions about the policies and strategies they are to undertake. So imagine the kind of opportunity you as a public policy professional have as a student of the School of Public Policy and Governance. You do it while you are still a student. Again, some really interesting reports, as you may see on the right, all a product of the engagement of our students with wider policy community. Mind it, these are all student-led activities. The faculty, the school is a facilitator, but they just hold the hands so that students can produce some of this really inspiring and excellent pieces of work. This is a snapshot. Rural experiential learning is an integral part of the program that allows the students, given that most of the students are from urban setting, an opportunity to immerse in the rural area. This is a unique opportunity of learning by doing, where the students get to spend time in the rural areas, try to understand how institutions work, try to get a glimpse of the rural society, and use that awareness and exposure as a part of their learning endeavors. TISS, School of Public Policy and Governance, strives to be a vibrant place. It is a space, a platform that brings together national and internationally reputed scholars who who are invited to the school and who are actually engaged with the schools in delivering in some of the most engaging lectures. Every week we have what is known as a perspective lecture series, again a student-led initiative supported by the teachers, where we have some of the best minds across the world who come and speak with us. We have people from Harvard University, Michigan University, and indeed all over the world. While of course we also get a large number of activists from within the country, large number of grassroots workers who share their experiences through this perspective series. So whatever is not covered as a part of curriculum is covered through these lectures and seminar series. COVID, as I did not even mention, has been one of the most challenging, times of our generation and your generation too, perhaps even more for you as youngsters. And the school has proactively engaged with a series of reports and publication. It has been a learning curve for all of us. It has been a learning experience. We have tried to make sense. And as you can see on the right, a large number of publications that have come up trying to make sense of what is happening and trying to inform policies in a way that are just, that actually look at the different challenges, especially those faced by different marginalized groups, and those decisions that can help the governments, whether it is the state government or the national government, try out different policy options. The good news and very exciting part of the program are the international exchange programs that are offered in the institute. We have been extremely fortunate, though fortunate is a wrong word because we have actually worked toward it. It's not been luck, it has actually been training our students. And every year our students get selected for very prestigious international exchange program. This includes Sciences 4, this has included Birmingham International Summer School. We have this reputation of sending students abroad every year for these international exchange programs. A significant section of our students also write the UGC NET examinations and clear that. And across the country, whenever there's a seminar, there's a conference, students get called and they're present, and invariably our students get some of the best awards in these. Career opportunities are really important for young professionals who are thinking of making a mark in the professional lives. So students, upon completion of their degrees, find different kinds of employment opportunities. A significant section gets absorbed in the different departments of the government. Some of our best students also get into multilateral agencies such as UNDP, the Clinton Foundation. Several students also pursue higher education in some of the best universities, both in India and abroad. We are very happy to share that this month two of our alumni have actually completed their PhD. One from University of Oxford, the other from the University of Manchester. Both of them are from the first batch of Public Policy and Governance Master's Program. We are very proud of them, and we wish to find more and more people from this group who will find mention in our subsequent winter schools. This is the list of the faculty. You can see that they are the people from some of the best institutions, both in India and abroad. There are people who have got fund fellowships, people with Commonwealth and Turing scholarships. However, what they are interestingly most well known for is the way that they work very, very closely with the students, the way they are very invested in the journeys of their students. So once again, a very warm welcome to the School of Public Policy and Governance. Make the most of this opportunity. I would urge all of you to write your own stories and claim your own space within the school. Thank you very much. Okay. So with that, I hope that you have got some kind of a flair and a flavor of what the course in public policy and governance looks like. Now it's going to be study time for all of you. And your first teacher is Professor Asim Prakash. Now, Professor Asim Prakash has been one of the person who has founded and conceptualized the School of Public Policy and Governance at the ISS. That was in the year 2013-14. But there's much more to this initiative.
And there's much more to this.
Than his involvement. He has been a policy professional and an academic for the last 20 years, has published books and written papers, but he has been a pioneering figure in the entire discipline of public policy and governance in the context of the country. He is on the planning of he's in the planning board of several departments of universities across the country. He has also been instrumental in planning the public policy courses outside of the countries and has provided his services across the world. A well-found fellow, Professor Asim Prakash, has also had a stint at the Oxford University, and he has extensively taught, written, and published on public policy. What Professor Asim Prakash actually brings to the table is cannot be better captured by what his students understand him as. He's seen as a person who's totally invested in the school and in the progress of the students. So once again, I extend a warm welcome to all of you, and I request Professor Asim Prakash to take it over from here.
Thank you so much, Ipshita, for that very kind introduction. Welcome once again. I second Ipshita's warm welcome to all of you. I hope I'm audible and clear. Please let me know if there is a lag somewhere, because unfortunately, for some reason, the fiber coming to our campus from the internet service provider has something gone wrong there. So I'm on the hotspot. So I hope I'm clear. And but if there is a lag, please do let me know immediately. So I will try to shift spaces and try to go to for a better connection. Okay. So let me so the rules are as follows for this thing. I would like to much more of an interactive session, but if you need to ask anything or if you want to engage with it, kindly raise your hand, the virtual hand. Don't start speaking altogether, otherwise it becomes a problem in managing. So I would, so Twinkle is saying that go for a better connection. Is there a lag in my voice now?
So the connection is going like...
No, voice is clear.
I think it could be, connections are at both ends. So you also check your own connections, please.
Yes, yes.
So Ipshita, you let me know if there is a.
Yes, no,
Could
I
you let
think
me
this
know
is
if there-
perfect at this point of time, Professor Asim. So you
Okay.
may please go ahead.
Yeah. So now what I want to talk to you about it, discuss about is something called competing paradigms of public policy. Now, this itself, I would say, is that a wrong understanding, a wrong title, though I have given the title. But still, I'm saying is a competing paradigm. Paradigm means that something, I will not go into the theoretical details of paradigm, but paradigm basically means when one set of activities, one set of pattern ends and the new begins. So that means that whatever was there earlier is no more, and the new set of ideas come in and they play a part in conceptualizing and framing the policies. This is what basically it means, competing paradigms. Now, what I want to share with all of you, and many of you must be already knowing, it will be a very, very basic course, basic introduction today before we, because when you don't know your participants, so everybody is at uneven, you don't know the unevenness of the group. So, so I would try to bring everybody on a level playing field by this very minimal and basic introduction on various understanding of public policy. So first thing is that here is what I want to ask all of you. How many of you heard about Kautilya's Arthashastra, or what they call Machiavelli's Prince? So what were there those books discussing? Anyone? Aishan. So what were those books all about? Anybody wants to say that? Rimjim, do you want to say that? What were those books about?
Good evening, sir. Those books were basically about administration, governance, aspects of economy, organization of the government, and so on.
Okay, very good.
There are several responses, Professor Asim, also on the chat box.
Anyone, any?
So may I?
Okay, just sorry, just give me 1 minute. Yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, to me, in my
Yes,
opinion,
who was that?
Pratiti, sir. So the state is basically, the Prince is basically a novel about, not a novel exactly, it's a treatise on the sovereign and how the statecraft is to be formed, and how the sovereign is to be, the qualities of a sovereign, and how the statecraft and the economy is to, is to be formed. Yeah.
So may I?
Very good, very good. I'll start. Excellent. So I'll start my discussion from.
Asim, now the
What's your
voice
name?
is lagging.
Yes, go ahead.
Now the voice is lagging, but now it appears to be okay. Could you please put it on the presentation mode, Asim?
No, I don't think I was speaking anything. There was some. I have closed it because this thing crashed. PowerPoint crashed. I'm again reopening it. So what do you see on the screen?
Review how it began.
How it began.
Is the screen visible?
It is, the screen says review how it began.
Ipshita, am I audible?
Yes,
You're
you
audible.
are.
You're audible.
You're audible. Can you put on the presentation mode, Professor Asim?
Am I audible?
You are audible, Professor Asim. Could you just put
No,
on the...
am I audible?
Yes.
You're audible. Professor Singh, you're audible.
The screen, I've stopped sharing the screen itself. Okay, I get the point. What is there in contemporary issues in public policy? Is that what you're showing on the screen?
Right now,
Yes.
that is what is being shown. Yes.
If I do it, without a PowerPoint presentation, let me try like this, because I don't think both are happening together. Okay, so what I was trying to explain to all of you is that there are various frameworks of public policy which coexist together. And what I call this as 5 big moments in the discipline of public administration. Now, let me start by this. Why I pose this question about Arthashastra and Machiavelli's Prince, as because they were the first treatise who spoke about, as a couple of you already said, about the statecraft. But one of the critical point which all of us should remember, that these 2 treatises, seminal works of their own time, were talking about how a monarch, a ruler, a king should control and govern the subjects and the economy. That is the most critical point. They were not talking about offer intervention from the perspectives of the people who reside in that territory. They were talking it through. They were writing about how the monarch should control the subjects, govern the subjects and the economy in the interest of retaining their own rules. So that was the perspective through which these books were written. However, with 2 epochal events, the landmark events, the American Revolution and the French Revolution, these were the 2 landmark events which brought people to the center of the whole understanding of governance. Both of these revolutions famously called for certain inalienable rights which rest with all of individuals born as human beings. That is the life, that is the right to life, liberty and property. That is what, and that should be the basis for the existence of the state. Now, what is the difference between the Machiavelli and Kautilya was trying to mention, and the current? Okay, let me just try it once again.
Or Asim, you could share it with me and I will share. My connection is good. If you can mail it to me, I will share.
Okay, I'll do that. Let me try once again if it is working, otherwise I will share.
It has come.
It has come now?
Yes. This is perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, is the American and the French Revolution slide on your? Okay, now I think with the okay. So now we try to point out that the citizens are the center of all interventions on behalf of the state. They created certain language which talked about the unalienable rights. That's a life, liberty, and what American Declaration of Independence called was pursuit of happiness, whereas the French called it liberty, equality, and fraternity. Now, what is the difference here? Difference here is that the citizens are at the center of any intervention which has to be conceived on the part of the state. Now, let me begin by this. What is public policy broadly? Public policy broadly is about the application of your knowledge, a social knowledge, that means which is collectively held by the society for furthering human cause. It is very simple. I'm just trying to start with a very, very simple understanding. Now, if you see this photo, which is there, and very famous phrase, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., he says, your liberty to swing your fist ends just where my nose begins. What does this, in terms of policy, what does it say? Anybody wants to try it once? What does it say in terms of?
Limitations to liberty.
Limitation to liberty. Very good. Anything else?
Reasonable restrictions.
Reasonable restriction and limitation to liberty. Okay, let me start, take it from there.
Sir, where there is a right, there is a duty.
Okay.
Freedom
great.
in a way that it doesn't harm the other person's freedom or welfare.
Good, all very good answers, but let's add. It's fine now, it's fine. Let me come back. Now, so now, one of the points which all of you have said absolutely correct answer, but one of the things which there is that intervention so that my liberty does not hurt anybody's nose. If I still choose to hurt the nose of somebody, there'll be an external intervention. Who will stop me? A legitimate authority will come and stop it. Like I keep on saying several times, I've said in my class also, this very famous song of the yesteryears, I will call, because now he's not famous, now he's not singing anymore perhaps, Honey Singh, which you might have all heard about. Music bajaoge tez to anti police bula degi, something like that. So this is all about that. If you flout a law, there is a state which is a neutral arbitrator which will step in. So your liberty to swing your fist ends just where my nose begins. And if you still choose to hurt my nose, there'll be an external institution who is neutral, neutral between both the warring factions, and they will take appropriate action. Now, this is what all about. And how will that state take the action? This is all public policy is about. So this is the application of social knowledge for furthering the human cause. Let's go to the next slide. So social knowledge is all about for social betterment. It is about gradual enhancement of our life, amelioration of our social life. It is also about the social knowledge becomes what I'm trying to explain is that object of that social knowledge is the human and the community. In the current milieu, in the current age, you also talk about social knowledge is not only about human beings, it's also about animals. There's the talk about animal rights. There's talk about various flora and fauna. So the object of social knowledge is for, but I'm talking about how it started. This is what my attempt is to explain to you how this all started. So it started by the social knowledge is for any social knowledge. The application of social knowledge should be for human and the community. This is how any public intervention by the name of public administration or anything else started. Now, what I want to share with all of you here is I think this is again crashed. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Just give me 1 minute. Again, it is. Khushbu, is it visible now?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
So what I'm trying to explain to all of you, that there are 5 moments in intervention in public affairs. What we have till now discussed is about the intervention in public affairs, which was the social knowledge has to be used for intervening to enhance the quality of the well-being of humans. So how did the intervention in public affairs started? So we are saying that there are 5 moments: public administration, developmental administration, new public administration, new public management, public policy, and regulatory state. Now, please note that these are all overlapping moments. In the current situation in India, all the 5 frameworks coexist. It's not that one was older and the new has started. All of these coexists. So this is a very peculiar kind of a socio-economic pattern which you see in most of the developing world. Now let me explain what is public administration. What is classical?
The screen is frozen. Now it's fine.
No, it was. Okay. So the moment 1 is about public administration. Public administration is largely what the government does. The government conceives the policy, government implements the policy, government monitors the policy. But one of the critical thing is when you study public administration, you are not studying the phenomena for its own sake. You are studying the phenomena because you believe that there's a technical, all policy problems, all existing situation, all ills of the society, they're all technical problems. They're all technical questions, and you can resolve them by applying scientific knowledge based on technical expertise. So the public administration as a discipline was born to help the policymakers through their scientific understanding, through their expertise, to help and resolve the social issues which are, or policy issues, or poverty, developmental issues which any society is experiencing. This is not to say that the age of public administration is over. The age of public administration still persists. There are so many schemes right now all around you. I'm sure all of you know this, which are conceived by the government, they are implemented by the government, they're monitored by the government. And when they're conceived by the government, that basically means that there was an idea of a policy problem, there existed a problem, and somebody and a group of people, a group of experts came together and decided this is how technically you can resolve the problem. So this was the moment 1 called public administration. Now you go to the next stage, which is called developmental administration. Now, what is developmental administration? Developmental administration is all about the subject itself came up in the 1950s, 60s, when there were lots of countries which were independent from the colonial powers. These were called the post-colonial societies. They were all underdeveloped. They had rampant poverty, and they were all soft states. Any 3 of you? What does soft state means? Anybody wants to take a guess there?
A state that lacks the capacity to implement its own rules. Like it can make a rule, but it is not able to implement or that rule.
I'll push you further. Very good answer, but I'll push you further. Oh. When the state is not able to implement its own rule, what does it entail?
Sir, come again. Just 1 second.
I'm saying it was an excellent answer, but I want to push you further. I want to ask you, when the state is not able to implement its own will, what does it mean?
Sir, would it mean that like they don't have control over the economic or the market side of things?
Lack of sovereignty.
Okay,
So
anybody else?
institutional anarchy.
Sir, lack of
May I?
states sovereignty, absence of sovereignty.
Okay.
The state is unable to assert its position in the global scenario.
Sir, it is a term coined by Gunnar Myrdal, which
Okay.
talked about states which were having lots of issues with related to poor education, health, socioeconomic indicators which were bad. So they can be the states, soft states, the developing south worlds basically.
So soft states are basically, according to me, not the developing countries exactly, but the states which have we have something. Okay, so we have nuclear powers, right? We have nuclear
okay.
powers, and soft states are the second stage of countries which are actually in the which are developed but do not actually have the nuclear capability but potential. I do not know whether this is right or wrong, but yeah.
The soft states do not take hard decisions.
Okay, let me
even
come
if
in
the
now.
situation
Shivani, the last one. Last one from Shivani. Shivani, go ahead. The last one. Yeah.
So the soft states do not take hard decisions, even if the situation demands. The soft state policy weakens the capacity of the state in enforcing rule of law.
Okay. Now,
hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, soft states are basically states where institutional anarchy prevails.
Absolutely. Now, I'll just elaborate on that. I will just give a slightly different understanding of soft states from the institutional, picking up from the institutional anarchy, Gunnar Myrdal's thesis and all. See, what does soft state mean? Soft state basically means it does not, I will not say institutional anarchy. I will say that it does not have developed institutions, or institutions have not penetrated, or the institutions do not have the capacity to implement their own vision. So developmental administration came up with an idea that you need institutions in the society. It is not only about executing, monitoring, and conceiving policies. You require specific institutions which can cater to that particular context of post-colonial societies. So as you see that in Indian context, I have listed few on the screen. Planning Commission, Community Development Programs, Commission for Scheduled Caste, public sector, so many CSIR, scientific institutions. So see, so many of institutions came up in the realm of public sector. All of them are in the public sector, in the realm of economy, in the realm of governing education, in the realm of promoting development among the most backward regions. So these were the developmental administration concerns. It's not only about government having an idea and implementing it. It is also, the developmental administration was all about establishing institutions which can penetrate and execute between the first moment and second moment. Are there any questions on first moment and the second moment?
Oh, yes, I had a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, so how will we measure, or how do we decide that which kind of institutions are developed and which are not functioning properly? And what is the benchmark? How do we actually get to know if they are working properly or not?
See, this will be a subject of some discussion in the subsequent sessions. Then when we say why and how to measure, what to measure, how to measure. In the discipline of public policy, it's called that impact analysis, institutional impact analysis. There are two kinds of impact analysis. One is the outcome-based analysis. Education rate, what is the general enrollment ratio? How many people are literates? How many people are below the poverty line? These are the outcome analysis. This is called impact outcome analysis. The other is that institutional impact analysis, where you try to understand why do institutions, to what level of efficiency are they working. So there will be subject of discussion subsequent, somewhat, not exactly, it will not go in much depth, but this is, and is a very complicated in a technical exercise of understanding the impact of institutions.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else, or I can go to the next slide?
So I had a question.
Yeah. Yes.
So, Sir, could you please give an example of a country that maybe falls under the definition of soft state?
See, this is the 1950s and 60s we are talking about. At that particular time, most of the colonial world which got independent were known as the soft states. But right now, I would say Pakistan is a soft state. Many of the African countries are of soft state. Some of the countries which has done tremendously good have come out of that bracket, like Bangladesh is doing tremendously well right now. Nepal is a soft state as of now.
Sir, how about India?
India's institutional capacity is very robust. That's a different discussion altogether, because see, one is the institutional, that's what I was trying to not get into that debate of the institutional capacity, but since you have asked it, I'll just give a very quick answer to it. See, one is the institutional capacity and one is the institutional unwillingness. So India lies between the unwillingness and institutional capacity. I would not say that Indian institutions don't have the capacity, but that's a discussion which is completely of a different nature.
Sir, would we also count states like Mexico and Colombia as soft states?
Colombia would come under something which is called predatory states, where the ruling elites uses the resources for its own gain. Mexico is not a predatory state. Zaire is a predatory state. Mexico would be a soft state. You're right there. Okay. Can I go to the next slide now?
I have a question.
Yeah, please. Barmeet, go ahead.
Is the label of soft state a temporary position, as in, let's say, any country which is very, doing very well right now has the possibility of turning into a soft state depending upon its economic, political, and various other factors?
Absolutely, you are absolutely right there. See, and now you have said a very, very important point. The point which you are trying to raise is that policy is not technocracy. Policy is not about measurement only. Policy is a political process. So you may be very powerful. Recently, one of a very famous international theorist of Indian origin, Indian citizen, based at NUS Lee Kuan Public School in Singapore, Kanti Bajpayee, he has written that American democracy is under threat. Because American democracy is not able to sustain the continuous impartiality of the institutions. So it's all, so policy is about a political process. Okay. Now let's go to the third movement, which is called, basically we said that it is called new public administration. Now what is new public administration? New public administration basically said that any development and administration is not value neutral. That's what the state is supposed to be, value neutral. The state is above the citizens. The rules are to be implemented in a very value neutral fashion. It doesn't matter whom you're interacting. It can be person A, B, C, D, but for everyone. Now, if you complicate it further, the policy is made for the citizens, for instance. Education policy is for the citizen, for all citizens. Now, this is a value neutral approach. So all citizens, all children below the age of 10 would be allowed, will be provided free and compulsory education. This is a value neutral approach. But when you come to the society, what happens there? That a girl child may not be sent to school, or some people may go to this school, but they would be discriminated and they would be dropped out. So what new public administration was trying to say, that you cannot have a value neutral approach. because different social categories, different individuals relate with policy from their own social location. So the administration had to be very client-centric. There should be a participatory decision making. There should be decentralized administration which could take into the local context into account. Let me give an example. Is one of the very off-quoted example which I give is about polio drops in Bihar. So this is one of the this I noted this when I was doing a field work in one of the districts of Bihar few years ago. So there was, all of us know, there's a very famous polio. India has achieved the target, vaccinated everybody for polio. It is a seminal case study. So this polio drop the volunteers, the executives were supposed child is there, wherever the polio drops had to be administered, they used to give the polio drops. Now the village, you know, a typical Indian village historically is structured, geographically structured, where different caste, people belonging to different castes stay in different locations. So when this particular group of people who were administering, I'll request to kindly mute yourself, whoever's phone is that. So what one is trying to say here, when they update, they reach to the particular area of or a geographical space in the village where the lower caste used to stay, these people didn't enter that particular geographical area. They kept a table outside that area, and the children or parents are supposed to come there and get the polio drop administered. Whereas the same people went door to door in the upper caste locality. So what I'm trying to say, the same policy is interactingly differently. So a policy should not be value neutral. So that's why people who are interested in feminist studies, people interested in women's studies, who are interested in understanding policy through the lens of identities. So you all notice that there is a gender lens to a public policy, because you have to incorporate that access. The policy idea cannot access every single individual, because every single individual interacts with that policy from their or her social location. Are there any questions on this? Am I able to explain this new public administration to all of you?
So can you please repeat about the thing you said, that the people who are more interested towards gender studies or feminist study, because the voice lag was there?
So see, there will be two specific sessions for you also on gender and public, one specific session on gender and public policy. But just quickly to say that if you're interested, the example which I was trying to give, that any policy which is made as a citizen by taking into account only citizens without understanding different identities through which the policy may mediate, will not able to take into account the gender concerns, for instance. For instance, if all of you must be remembering that a very famous incentive which Bihar government again once gave of providing cycle to any girl child who is visiting the school. So that was a particular way to look at the constraints the women face. If you frame a policy by taking only citizens into account, you will not able to understand the specific gender related constraints which may make the policy a failure. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
So could this also be related to the one size fit all problem that policy has a lot of times?
Anything else? One size fits all is a very, very generic term. What one is trying to say here is, it's not only about one side. It is a phrase, very loose phrase. This slide is that administration and development is not value neutral. You cannot say that I like, they have, so the same policy will benefit everybody equally. Is that okay? Any other question?
Thank you, sir.
Is there any other question? Okay, let me go to the next slide. Now, the fourth moment of public policy is about the new public management. Now, new public management is a term which came up, a practice of new world history is called Thatcher and Reagan era. They were the proponents of market economy. They were proponents of privatization. They were proponents of a lessening of the state subsidies. So, and that's where globalization, economic integration started. So one of the very, very powerful discourse of which currently also persists is about that the state failure and state capture can be remedied if the power is taken away from the state. The power should be with the market. Now, the second thing which came up here was that why should government do everything, from producing bread to telephones to cars to why should government be? It's not the business of the government to be in every business. So what the government should do, it should also steer the economy. It should not row the economy. See, what is rowing? If you remember, if you think of rowing is a single person who sits on a narrow boat and rows the boat. So the government should not be the only person which should be bothered about the economy. It should be multiple actors. It should be multiple solutions. There should be multiple players who should be in the economy, and the government should row them, facilitate the process. They should empower the people to enter into the market. And most importantly, that the government institution should also be corporatized. That means the government should also work on what they call in the framework of market, profit and loss, demand and supply. So the market, they should develop a market-oriented approach. They should recover the cost which they are investing in. And lastly, they recommended, which I have already mentioned in different ways, that the government is not the sole player in the market, but it should move to governance. That means there are multiple players there. Okay, is there any question on this particular slide?
So if you could elaborate on the point government to governance.
Okay, that will come up again in the next slide, but since you've asked, I will quickly explain. See, government is something which we were discussing in the moment of public administration. Government executes, government conceives a policy, executes the policy, monitors the policy. That was the government. Government is a sole actor. Now, when you move to a public management framework, one of the biggest or one of the corpus of institutions which come in, which are market-centric institutions. So that means you are saying government is not only the actor. Then the third kind of players who come in are different. Third kind of players are which emerge from multilateral institution, world institution, locally the civil society actors. So governance is all about not only government as a single institution, but replacing government as not a single institution, but governance means multiple. Is that clear?
Sir, I lost you where you said that not only the single institution, government is not the single institution in the governance. And the next slide, I lost you.
So see, government to governance basically means that government is not the only actor / player / institutions. There are multiple institutions like multilateral actors, market-based institutions, civil society-based institutions which interact. They help facilitate with conceiving, implementing, and monitoring the policies. So the government is not the only actor. So when you talk about, think of new public management, it's beyond government. They're market-based institutions which are also a part of the governance. Is that clear now?
Yes, sir. Very clear. Thank you so much.
Sir, I had a doubt.
Yes, please go ahead.
Could you explain what is state capture in the last slide?
The state capture is, let me ask you something. Suppose you have a sarpanch of a village, correct? And you have a grant that the road has to be constructed from village to the main Grand Trunk Road, which is going by the side of a road. So how will you take that decision? Where to build the road in the village? How will you take that decision? Because the moment road comes, the property adjoining those road, their value rises many folds. So how will you take that decision? Yes.
Sir, I think the sarpanch will talk to all the members of the 5 members, right? So he'll talk, and then the 2 states that are 2 places that are joining each other, they will have to talk about it.
Very good answer. So you are talking about a participatory developmental approach. And what a sarpanch will ideally do, he will bring what is called the Gram Sabha. He will convene a Gram Sabha to decide what is the best geographical area through which the road should be constructed to give maximum benefit to the village. This is an ideal and a very good approach, and that should be done. Now the capture, if we call, okay, the sarpanch has to capture it, he will ensure that the road passes through where he and his kith and kin or his own constituency or his own people stay. So that would be the capture of the local panchayat. So that, and similarly, if you create policies, if you create rules and regulations, which benefit only few in the name of larger public interest, that is the policy capture or the state capture.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Am I able to explain that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'll come to the 5th moment and the last moment, which starts with the public management. Now, public management is about the 5th, is public policies beyond the government, which I explained. This not only the government, but there are multiple players in the market. Now, I just want to please listen to this to me carefully, besides reading the slide which are there. You might have heard of so many institutions which are there: Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, Electricity Regulatory Authority of India. Then there is something called for instance, Insurance Regulatory Authority of India. So there are many regulatory authority coming up. Now, please recall when we were discussing in public administration. So we were saying it is the government which conceives a policy, which delivers the policy. So that means government is having an idea, it is providing that service also. Correct. Now, in the situation, I'll give a very typical example of, say, telecom in India. Why there was need for a regulatory authority? So regulatory authority is an independent authority which comes in to ensure that there is no conflict, or there is they are able to regulate the market by ensuring that the interest of all stakeholders are protected. So, but if the state itself provides the services also and takes the decision on those services, on what terms private actor will participate in the market, there is a possibility that the state will always take a decision in the favor of its own enterprise. For instance, the telecom sector, because the Department of Telecommunication in India resisted for very long that they should not allow an independent regulator to come in. So independent regulator comes in, which is able to create rules, they're able to create standards, they are able to emphasize that certain decisions are going to be taken on the basis of certain principles, which provides a level playing field to all stakeholders. So the increasingly what has happened, the functions of the state, it has not happened to that extent in our country, but if you see Western Europe and US and other countries where market has penetrated to a larger extent than what is it in India. So there's an increasingly role of that regulator, where it is able to regulate the sectors by being outside the government. So the power to take decision, the state should not have the power to create a policy and also to arbitrate in case of a conflict between public and a private player, or between a private and a private player, because state will tend to be biased in its own interest, or if it's a state capture, it might be biased in the favor of particular private interest. So more and more you see these functions are being transferred to a regulatory state, regulatory institutions which are coming up to steer the economy and bring both the public and private sector on a level playing field. So here what happens, the regulatory functions of government. So regulatory functions of goes to a regulator, and the policy making remains with the government. Government decides the policy, but how that it will be regulated, it will be done by the regulatory institution. So this is what the regulatory state is all about. And this is now there's now the last thing which I want to just introduce to you is that there is a tension there. The decisions taken by the regulators are based on objective realities, what data tells them. The decision is taken by what is the best for the economy. But often in most of the democracies, decisions are taken because of the political process, which might not be the best for the economy. So there is a tension also in the regulatory state between the political process and efficiency-oriented technocratic approach of the regulatory state. But this is elsewhere, which has quite been institutionalized in Western Europe, where regulatory agencies, which are the rule-making bodies, sit outside the government as an independent entity who decides the rules and norms, whereas the government and the legislative assemblies or institutions are restricted to the making of the policies. So this is the last moment in the regulatory state. So basically what we said, that there are 5 different frameworks of the regulatory state of public policies. It's a public administration, new public administration, developmental administration, new public management, and regulatory state. But just be very we should be very clear about it, that when I started earlier in the beginning, that it's not that one stage ends and the next stage begins. They are all overlapping in this. They all overlap. India still has a huge, the last thing which Amrita, hi, I'm sorry I've taken more time, but I'll take 3-4 minutes and just now last thing which I want to just share with all of you is that when we say a market-based economy or a state-based economy, there is nothing like that. These are conceptual terms. There is no economy which is completely state-based. There's no economy which is completely market-based. But when we say that India is a market-based economy, or say US is a market-based economy, what it means, the word means, is that the ratio of the presence of market or ratio of contribution of market-based GDP is more than the state-based GDP. So there is nothing, there is no state in the world which is purely state-led centric development or a purely market-centric development. So now these 5 movements which I've spoken about, the public administration, the new public administration, developmental administration, we spoke about the new public management and the regulatory state. These are 5 different ways to conceptualize policy, and they all coexist together. It's not that one is finished and the other has begun. They all coexist together, and that's how, and that is what when we say that there are different frameworks of public policy. It is not frameworks, but mind it, it is the way the lens of public policy is there. This is the lens through which you have to understand different public policy. There is something else which is there, which are different competing theories to do public policy. These are what we are talking about is a framework of public policy. Theory is a different thing, which we'll have occasion to discuss at some point, some other time. But that's it. If there are any questions, quick 3-4 questions, then I'll then because anyway we are slightly running late. Yeah.
So I just have one question. Does market-led development fall under the purview of capitalistic development, or could we just, or are they replaceable terms? Because
no, they are not, they cannot substitute one with the other, but capitalism by and large means presence of market in a degree higher than the state presence. But there's something called state capitalism also.
Yeah,
where state promotes market, and there is a private capitalism. There's a private capital-based capitalism.
The regulatory role is basically facilitating the capitalistic market, right?
Absolutely. Where private players are also there. So there's a tension there. See, very simple terms, forget about concepts. If I own an industry, and you have also started an industry there, and Devanshi and Shubh and Mansha all have started the same sector of industry there.
Mm-hmm.
If I am the person who will make the rules for that sector, so I will be always be biased in my favor. So the state should not be the maker of the rule as well as the arbitrator in case of conflict. So you need an independent regulatory body to do that.
Okay. Thank you so much.
So I had a question.
Yes, Shreya, go ahead.
So you just said that regulators regulate the policy with an objective reality, and government decides on the policy with a political process.
Yes.
So in this situation, how do we get a middle ground, or how do we come to a middle ground and get to a decision?
See, long ago, around 5-7 or maybe, I was interviewing one of the foremost policy mandarins of this country, somebody called Montek Singh Ahluwalia. And I asked him, sir, will you please tell me how policy is, how it's made? So he said, I don't know. So the message which I'm trying to give to you here is that policy is by and large a political process. Policy is not decided sitting in an air-conditioned room in Delhi. There are many policies which are decided like that also. But what I'm trying to say is that what happens then? Why does the best of the policies fail? I was trying to make it a lighter vein, but what I'm trying to explain, why do best of the policy, best of the minds fail? Because policies, many a times technocrats, empiricists, they make on the basis of the objective reality. I think Amrita is going to handle that in much better way. What I'm going to say now, they make policies through an objective reality out there. I have all the data. How many people are out of the school? How many people are not able to access because of the road conditions? How many people can't afford? I have all the data. So I will make policy on the basis of that data. So this is the objective realities. Subjective reality is that I stay in a district where there are lots of markets, there's a lot of employment opportunity. So even if I study till class 10, I will still go to that market as a laborer, because even if I go to school till class 10th, my returns of that education or returns of the market will not be more than that. If without going to class 10th, I can earn that. So that is the subjective reality. So there's a disjunction between the objective understanding of the situation there and the subjective preference of the people. This is what you say when the best of the policies fail. It might also fail because it's captured, local captures also there. That is another reason, but one of the reasons is that. And that is where the new public administration becomes very important. If you make policy only in the name of citizens, where you don't look at people through what are the structural constraints because their identity of gender, about caste and so on, geographical isolation. So if you don't take those things in account and you feel that everybody can access policy to the same capacity, that then the policy is about got to fail, because objective realities are different. For people, subjective reality is completely different.
Right. So
it's very simple. In the age of Zoom, sitting in Hyderabad, it's easier for me to go on the internet, but we have students who have to travel 1.5 kilometers, go and sit at an elevated plane or a small mountain to access the signal on their phone to attend classes. The same Zoom-based policy which this is doing because of the pandemic has differential impact. Okay, I will stop here because I've been eating in the next thing. We have to inform the gentleman after this lecture also that we are delayed. So welcome, Amrita. I'm so happy to see you after such a long time.
Likewise.
I'm so happy to see you. So I'm really, really pleased, and I don't know what to say, proud or whatever, that Amrita was one of our very good students. She's a lawyer, but because of her passion, she decided to pursue public policy. Not many people who do law will come and dirty their hands in the policy domain, because as corporate lawyer, they can earn much more than from the very beginning itself than what a policy professional may earn after a decade. So Amrita decided to pursue law. After doing her law, she decided to do policy. But what I'm just trying to, and this should be a lesson to all of you, or a learning experience to all of you, that see, policy is not about data. You cannot do much if you only look on data, but you cannot afford to ignore the data. So even if you're scared of numbers, you should learn how to handle. And Amrita is one of those people who had nothing to do with data in the initial days, but now she's somebody who can work easily. He can intersect with big data sets. She's a person who has worked with the union budgets, provided numbers to them, crunched numbers for MSMEs, and she's working in one of the institutes right now, which is called National Institute of Public Policy and Finance, which is the foremost government of India think tank on doing the budgetary analysis. So here is somebody who comes from the data, but can understand data, can talk on data without saying that I'm not an economist. Now, in some time, she has an offer. I don't know whether she's going to accept or not, but she has an offer to write a book on regulatory capitalism, the regulatory state. So now you see the bandwidth she has. And this is something which is very, very critical for a policy professional, that you can shift between law, ethics, data, and pure political process. So if any of you want to pursue public policy, you should be open to all disciplines. You cannot say that I only like economics, I only like data, or I will only do politics. I'll not study anything else. So there's somebody, and that's why I'm giving such an informal introduction rather than reading out a formal profile, because that's the way we would like all our students to become. And Amrita is no more. Amrita is almost a colleague of ours, no more a student. But thank you so much, Amrita, for coming. And I hope that your journey is going to inspire several generations of students who come to our school. Thank you so much, Amrita. Over to you.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you for all your kind words, but also thank you for having me here. A very good evening to all of you. I'm really happy to be here amongst you all. Firstly, I hope that you and your families are keeping safe. I wish these were normal times and we could meet in person, but these virtual sessions have their advantages also. So I think this winter school is a fantastic way to engage with so many of you. I see close to 300 people here, and I'm guessing you're from all over the country. Before we begin, I want to take a minute to just thank Dr. Asim Prakash and Dr. Ipshita Sapra for having me here. As you may have realized by now, I am an alumna of the School of Public Policy and Governance, the first batch, in fact. And of the many people and things that I associate this school with, Professor Asim is a key figure. I'm not surprised that therefore this school has decided to host this fantastic initiative. And you're trying to be as open and inclusive as possible, even though you're using Zoom as a platform. It's still, you're trying to break down the usual entry barriers at least. I also congratulate all of you guys for, 300 of you for signing up for this winter school. I think you've chosen to make good use of your time, really. And I hope to do my bit towards this also. On that wonderful note, I think we should begin today's session. As you may have seen, it is titled, Why Does Data Matter in Public Policy? Before I begin, I just want to tell you, I have a few slides where I have listed the concepts for today. Oh, it's already put up. Okay, great. Before the slides are put up, though, I just wanted to put up a disclaimer. Over the course of my professional career, I've had the privilege of working with the government, both at the state and central levels, several statutory regulatory authorities, and even judicial bodies like the higher courts. I will not be using any confidential information or data from my work with these bodies, but I do want to keep this talk interesting and still give you a ringside view of working on important and topical public policy issues, right? So I will be drawing upon my experiences of using publicly available data during the course of my work, the challenges we faced and potential ways to sort of overcome this. I've also had the privilege of working with possibly some of the best think tanks in the country also, and ones that have therefore a huge say and responsibility in providing inputs to the government and driving public policy actions even maybe. And therefore, for people working in these organizations, there automatically is an individual responsibility, right? That with every information point that you use to identify a problem or develop a policy solution, it has to be reliable, it has to be correct, and the analysis has to be systematic and scientific. These are, of course, loaded words, and we will deal with this a little bit in detail in some time. Apart from being a public policy professional, as Professor Asim mentioned, I'm also a trained lawyer who has almost always worked in interdisciplinary teams, right? So be it with economists, be it with management graduates, sociology graduates, etc. So during the course of this work, everybody comes at problems that we are handed from different sort of points of view, right? And it's almost natural for us now to have very long discussions, therefore, on what is the problem that we are trying to correct, what are the many ways to fix this. Now, lawyers like me tend to think that legal interventions, right, which is either through a law or an amendment to the law or through judicial intervention, which is through courts, is the best way to go about it. Some economists may think that maybe the government should withdraw, and allow, private industry companies or market competition to lead the way. Management graduates may think up other innovative perspectives to turn around a problem. Essentially, what we all, I think, agree on is that the only way to accurately identify a problem, develop a solution to address it appropriately, is to dive into the data surrounding the subject. Policymakers will usually always ask, what story does the data tell you, right? What does it tell you about the magnitude of a problem? What that means is, how big is it? How many people are affected by it? Where are these people who are affected by it located? Do you know? They might also ask you what the nature of the problem is, right? So what are the factors on which this problem depends? Does it, for instance, appear at a particular time in the year, or is it consistent throughout? Thirdly, it could be what contributes to a problem, right? Controlling for certain variables, is it possible to accurately, or at least approximately, certain factors that are leading to this problem? Then we move on to, let's say, more administrative related questions, right? Which level of state administration is capable of dealing with this problem? Is it going to be the district administration? Is it going to be the state administration? Is it going to be the center? Once you probably establish which level it is, then you ask, do these guys have the powers to invoke, to solve this problem? Who has these powers? If someone has it, why are they not using it now? Or is it the case that there are multiple parties with powers that they can exercise in multiple ways, and therefore there is a huge confusion? Typically, these are the kind of problems that you will. Sorry, we can. Is there somebody speaking in the background?
Professor Asim, could you please mute yourself? Professor Asim?
I think he's muted us, so he can't really hear what we're saying. Okay, never mind. I'll go ahead.
No, he's muted himself now.
Okay, all right. Hopefully, after this session, I want you also to be able to ask these questions. When working with data in the public policy ecosystem, these are important questions to ask. So hopefully the next time that you read about a public policy issue, wherever you do, you have the capacity to ask these, very important questions yourself. That's the aim of my session, really. All right. So now let's begin the session. Next slide, please. All right. Now, this is the structure of the presentation today. I will just introduce why and how data matters generally, not only with respect to public policy issues. We will then move on to discussing decision-making. Here, I want to bring in decision-making by the government specifically. Next, we move on to key challenges in using data in public policy. I will also sort of loop that in terms of how we utilize data in different stages of public policy making itself, right? We'll end with certain challenges, like I said, and certain misconceptions about data itself. All right, next slide, please. Okay, now just for a while, let's keep aside how data matters specifically for public policy, okay? Literally every organization, whether public or private, makes numerous decisions every single day. Now, this would include, allocating funds to the different activities they do or they perform, making a choice about what to buy, what to sell, what quantities to manufacture or procure in order, to buy or sell in case this is in terms of goods. Additionally, they might also want to communicate this to people, right? So as such, they must decide what to communicate, how much to communicate, how much to reveal about their business itself, right? At the end of the day, there will be a set of people who will be responsible to check what activities are completed, what remains, what has spilled over to the next day, how many people or machines, as the case may be needed to do it, etc., etc. Now, this is quite simple. Now, in most of these instances, or these tasks that I just laid out, that every organization will do, by the way, they rely on something that enables them to demonstrate whether they have made good or bad decisions. What they rely on is data. Data, simply put, and I think even the dictionary would define it this way, is that it's a collection of facts, figures, and statistics. The general perception about data is that it is always numeric. That is, all data is quantitative. That is, however, not true. There is also qualitative data, right? Quantitative data is what is factual. This is reliable data that, when studied, can help you understand or sort of generalize what works for a certain population, if you're looking at a population set of individuals, that is. Now, this is also mostly best to establish a cause and effect relationship, a direct relationship, and establish with certain credible authority that there are certain processes or patterns or attitudes that you see in a larger set of individuals. This is what quantitative data helps you do. However, there is also qualitative data, like I mentioned, right? Now, what does that do? It helps us understand these deductions that you make from numbers. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of the Household Finance Committee of the Reserve Bank of India. This was a committee that documented exactly how Indian households allocate assets in the course of their lives, right? Now, this report is quite seminal in that at a very, very large scale, it told us how we as Indians make decisions, right? Their findings are very relevant till date It's not a very, old report. It was in 2017, I think, and it's still very relevant and still used by us in our work in, in every day. In fact, we still go back and refer to it as and when we can, because it's shaped the policy actions of the central bank and the government quite a bit. And I'll just get to why that is. They found that a large fraction of the wealth of Indian households is in the form of physical assets. What do physical assets mean? It means gold or real estate. A very small percentage is invested in financial markets. Further, there is an even small proportion that is put in, let's say, old age, instruments that help in old age security, like pensions or insurance. Now, here's what quantitative data has done for you, right? It has helped you understand the state of the households in India. Now, here's what qualitative data will help you do. It will explain to you why these numbers are as they are, right? Now, if you were to run a survey, for instance, in the households that were covered in this, the report itself, you would want to ask them, why do they invest where they do? Why do they invest in gold and real estate when they have a bank close by, right? And what they might tell you is that they prefer investing money in gold instead of, say, life insurance, because there's just general lack of trust in financial institutions. And they would rather just, continue investing in gold. Or they will associate banks and insurance companies to fraud because they heard that somebody down the road has been, a victim of fraudulent activity or mis-selling of these products, which is quite rampant, by the way. Or I don't know, I mean, what I'm trying to convey here is that irrespective of what quantitative data you have in front of you, without qualitative data to understand why these numbers exist, you also don't know as a government or as the central bank or whatever it is, as a regulator per se, where to direct your policy efforts, right? And also your money, therefore. Do you make insurance agents, better regulated and penalize them, therefore, for mis-selling? Do you spend more money on awareness campaigns on pension products? Because it's actually just that people are not aware. If they were made aware, maybe they would, invest in that product. Should banks hire people more from within the community and send them door to door, explaining the benefits of certain products over others? Would that help? We just don't know. Because as of now, we're just looking at numbers and we don't know why it's there. In summary, I think what I do want to say is to make sense of a policy situation that you see in numbers, it's important that qualitative and quantitative data go together. And that is also the case for qualitative and quantitative research as well, right? Together is the operative word, because that helps you unpack the reasons for these numbers. It tells you the perceptions of people. It focuses on the individual's narrative over just that of the group, which I earlier had told you what quantitative data does, right? It generalizes what you see in a data set. Now, of course, it's important to remember that both have weaknesses. But of course, that's a whole session in itself, which is research methodology and how you use these kind of data. But I just want to say that both have weaknesses, but when they're used together to some degree, I think they are compensated by the strengths that they offer, all right? And one needs to be cognizant of this, especially when looking at data on public policy issues. Next slide, please. All right. Now, data-driven decision-making. This is quite a buzzword for private organizations. And in the government, it's called evidence-based policymaking. They nuance it a little bit more. Effectively, it's the same. However, here's the thing, right? A prerequisite for evidence-based policymaking is that the data that you use, right, the evidence that you call it, must itself be trustworthy. Yes. And that really depends upon the quality of such data. Credible statistics are important. For good governance, they are important for decision-making in society per se. I've just, what you see on the screen is just some prerequisites that I've listed for the quality of data that we certainly check for every time we are presented with a data set, or we ourselves build a repository, or we cull out information, from the internet or other data sources or whatever it is, right? Now, Is all accurate data considered good data? No, that's actually not the case. They may be accurate, they may be correct, but they may be either produced too late, or they may be not easily accessible, or they may be in conflict with some other data on the same subject. All right. So it's not good to say that good quality data is what is accurate. We need to go beyond that a little bit. Now, here are some dimensions that we look at when we go beyond just mere accuracy of data itself. All right. So I'll just take you through that. Trustworthy is fairly well understood, so I won't get into that. But let's get into timely and relevant. The census, for instance, collects a huge number of data points on Indian households, as you know. What is relevant to you from the census, though? It's a fantastic data set, agreed. But is there anything from there relevant to your needs specifically? If not, then maybe irrespective of the fact that it's such a great data set, we are sort of nudged to then find sources pertinent to our work, not be constrained by the fact that this is fantastic and everybody says that it is, and which it is. And for 10 years, until the next one is done, it really does serve every single purpose that you might need. But if it's not relevant, you just don't need to use it. Thirdly, it's credibility. Now, simply put, this is the confidence that you have in the producer of data, all right? This, of course, is generally built over time from using various data sources, understanding what works, what doesn't work. Most often it is related to how objective you think the data really is, all right? Another attribute of good quality data is accessibility. Now, this reflects how readily the data can be located and accessed. It's a fairly simple concept to understand. Interpretability is absolutely important, but I think it is fairly less spoken about when we talk about good quality data. The interpretability of data reflects the ease with which the user can understand and properly use and analyze data. Now, I distinctly remember one situation where there was a fairly rich data set from a state, but we couldn't use it because we simply didn't understand what some terms meant. So what was the, how the heads there are, of columns in a data set. We just didn't know what they meant. Now, this aspect doesn't get the attention it deserves. Why it's important is because the adequacy of these definitions of concepts, target population, variables, terminology, anything that underlies data is absolutely necessary to know when you use it, all right? If you don't understand it, there is a red flag already. You mustn't be making deductions using information or data that you just don't understand in the first place. You must most certainly also read up and actively research whether there are any limitations to the data set in front of you. Governments already collect a large amount of administrative data, right? And it's mostly for like routine reporting or like compliance checks. India's statistical architecture, I don't know how many of you, sort of know about it already, but it's quite vast and impressive, I must say. As I've come to understand also much later. I had no knowledge of how this worked, but now I do. It really has shaped policy and driven change for close to, well, now almost 75 years since independence. And I, of course, won't get into any detail, much detail at least, regarding this architecture, but, be it the census that tries to capture the state of every single Indian every 10 years, or the National Statistical Office, which we call NSO, where surveyors literally go out with physical forms to capture even like the exact number of eggs that this household has had in the past week, all right? For crimes, there is also the National Crime Records Bureau, which aggregates every single FIR from every single police station in the country. The civil registration system, the CRS, which captures every single death and birth every day in the country. An often mentioned problem, even though it's this massive grand architecture that I just spoke of, and I've just given you a glimpse of it, feel free to read up more on this. An often mentioned problem with this architecture and the way it functions, however, is that you don't receive timely information, which, like I have mentioned earlier, is a very important prerequisite for data, right? Now, here is where many private organizations come in to fill this gap. These are also, and I'll just demonstrate to you how, also different actors now that take part in public policy really. The NCAR, the National Council of Applied Economic Research, conducts a massive survey called the India Human Development Survey. They ask questions that the government doesn't, be it gender relations, be it caste. It's a very, very rich source of information, panel data on India itself. The Center for Study of Developing Societies, the CSDS, has been conducting these, opinion polling surveys for like close to 5 decades now. There is also the CMI, which I think is most popular now, which is the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, which provides high frequency data on the state of the economy and employment in general, and probably was most active during the national lockdown last year. The simple point that I'm trying to make, talking to you about so many actors, right, that are involved in the collection of data, usage of data, dissemination of data, all related to public policy aspects, is that there is a wealth of information and data on Indians. The many, many decisions that we make every day, why we make them, etc., etc. There is ample scope, therefore, for policy making in India to be generally rooted in data, evidence, as the government likes to call it. This is not just government data, there is also extremely high quality, high frequency data that private actors are pooling in also. In turn, it may well be said that therefore they also do play a role, a huge one at that, in driving policy, in policy action also. All right, next slide, please. All right. Typically, like I mentioned earlier, policymakers will ask, how do you know there is a problem? The answer is really in capturing, and if already captured, then analyzing the reliable and correct data. Ideally, in the life cycle of a policy, which is data analysis or analytics, as you may call it, whatever you want to call it, ideally in the entire life cycle of a policy, this ought to be used. Generally, it is understood to be done much after a policy is in implementation as a review of policy. But what we have noticed, at least in the years that I have worked, is that the government is now opening up to ex ante assessments, which is before the rollout of a policy, during the course of implementation, which is right after it's implemented, so within a year or so, and post, which has always been the most common method of sort of assessing, policy initiatives. It's not to say that it's wrong, post facto review, which is that you go back after 5-10 years of a policy has been implemented. Post facto review is probably the most common because it's also necessary for policy course correction, which invariably is done after that long also. All right. Let me give you an example. I'm sure everybody has heard of the Atal Pension Yojana, APY. It is a flagship pension initiative for unorganized sector workers in the country. They're generally also called informal workers. Now, the unorganized sector in the country itself is defined in many ways. It is either the overall percentage of people who have not moved into formal finance, like banks or institutions, or it's unregistered firms, people who work in unregistered firms, those that are outside the tax net, all right, or those that haven't registered themselves formally in the company registrar, for instance. Be that as it may, India currently lacks a database on its informal sector workforce. A couple of years back, there have been reports that the government is planning to build one, wherein the size, the distribution, the economic contribution of each informal worker will be captured, and worker details will be further seeded with their Aadhaar. I'm frankly unaware of the status on this one. But 3 years ago, at least, this informal economy made up half of our entire economy. Okay, it was just over 50%, in fact. So you can imagine how big this sector is. 43 to 50 crore workers. Now, here's the thing. Without understanding the demographics of such a sector, the trends in wages, which intuitively also will be irregular, maybe even seasonal in nature for such workers. How do you think a scheme like the APY can deliver the precision required to cover an enormous sector like this? Now, after a scheme like this was introduced, now the problem is compounded. After such a scheme was introduced, one that was already looking to target such workers, other schemes have also come in. There's something called the Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandhan, PMSYM, which caters to a subset of informal workers again. The lack of a coherent, targeted policy to ensure coverage for some 43 to 50 crore unorganized sector workers, even the number we don't know, frankly, is quite apparent, right? Now, this is just one example of how the problem needed to be defined better even before beginning to solve it, and in the absence of data to do so, really. So the exercise to actually collect that data should have been, the first exercise towards pension coverage. That's not been done. At least that should have begun in full earnest, really. Now, moving on to, when policy has been implemented, right? There's a wealth of information that's been generated after the policy has been implemented. This is not only relevant in the case of APY, but any government initiative. This is the case. Now, there are digital forms, there are physical forms, umpteen forms that a person fills up to onboard any scheme or initiative, like These pick up enormous amounts of information, right? Some of it is personal and sensitive too. What is done with this information, right? I mean, when we give information in forms, do we really, take a step back to say, but why do they need this? It's quite unnecessary. I don't see why this is germane to the scheme I'm signing up for, but we still give it. Ideally, schemes should be reviewed. Okay, I mean, this is basic, just general, like common sense that schemes should be reviewed both internally and externally by an independent agency to check whether fund allocation and outcomes match, whether targeted population has received benefits, whether grievances received in the implementation of this scheme are being reported, and how much time is being taken to sort of address these grievances, etc., etc., etc. Not just evaluated. Also, information on this needs to be put out. Yes, these are all facets that are extremely crucial and something that must be considered during the implementation of policy actions. In most cases, this is not done. Lastly, after a considerable span of time has passed since the policy has remained in effect, again, a post-facto assessment is required of this policy, right? Ideal would be that it is again done by an independent agency itself. This is, I think, to a large extent, like I mentioned earlier, it is being done. Post-facto assessments are being, given out to external agencies a lot more, think tanks, etc., a lot more. Next slide, please. All right. Now let's talk about some examples of where tremendous effort is needed in collecting and disseminating good quality data. Code data is something that, we hear a lot about cases in this country, the gigantic numbers of cases in this country, and the very, very low disposal rates. However, many of us don't think about engaging with this data. So I thought this might be a good one to begin with. The National Judicial Data Grid, also feel free to look up these portals, later, at your convenience. The NJDG statistics are generally the go-to resource, okay, when you want to monitor pendency and disposal of cases. The NJDG is a subset of something called the e-courts project that was launched in 2007 by the Ministry of Law and Justice. Now, this project aims to integrate technology with the judicial system. In particular, as you may realize once you yourself go through this portal and start finding information, there are three problems that have arisen. There are inconsistencies in what is reported, there is missing data, and there is restricted access to it. Please think of these aspects in light of what we just discussed earlier regarding the quality of data itself. Also feel free, like I said, to spend more time with it. The more you do, the more you actually look at these numbers, try to find information yourself, ask important questions, the more you will realize what the quality of data that so many bodies put out is. First, let's look at inconsistencies. Let's discuss inconsistencies that are reported, right? The NJDG reports record a few case types on its portal. I think it's around 24 to be specific. However, as someone who has worked with actual code data, which I have, there are close to 50 to 100 case types in data that the court administration maintains. All right. Now, someone is literally fitting all these case types, 50 to 100 of them, force fitting them into 24 case types so that it looks the way it does on the NJDG website portal, without any explanation, mind you, on this portal as to why and how that is the case. There will be clearly inconsistencies in how different people are interpreting this. That's number one. Second, there is also missing data. All right. Now, a study by some younger colleagues of mine at NIPFP, for instance, found that final orders were missing for more than 70% of these cases. Now, litigants may not be able to access the decision in their case, which is literally the hallmark of any sound judicial system. The data also lacks information across some data fields, such as how many times, for instance, a court has heard the same case. So we can't really tell how many times or how many years it has taken for one case itself in the case pipeline. Now, besides content, let's also talk about ease of access. All right. Ease of access also restricts how data is used. Even if the data was standardized and was made error-free, the current design of the system itself limits its usability. In the name of digitization, which again is a buzzword with many government initiatives, scanned copies of documents are uploaded. Now, these are not machine readable. For researchers like us, or people who want to actively work on data, actively work on these public policy issues, report back, engage with these bodies, it is extremely difficult because you just don't know how to. You literally need to go through 100+ pages of every single judgment to manually create a repository of information to then work on. All right. The e-courts committee, the recent one, in fact, has put up some standard operating procedures for digitization, but it's not retrospective yet. Okay, what that means is that decades and decades worth of files that are not digitized or are digitized but are scanned copies will no longer have to be redone. So all of that memory is lost. We can't work on it. It is also now up to individual courts, which will have the liberty to decide whether they want to update case information in a manner that is more conducive for research, etc., or not. Most often they choose not to, therefore. There are now private organizations like Daksh and with the Center for Legal Policy, which I worked for, which are now building independent databases on very important facets of the judiciary. This includes, appointments. There is, gender parity, gender diversity in courts, aspects on court infrastructure, etc. Again, there is a sort of a private leg that is coming into set right the vacuum in this space. I was in fact part of the first primary survey on court infrastructure in the Delhi NCR region, the National Capital Region. It was later scaled up to be done across all district courts across the length and breadth of this country. This is a very rich source of information on the state of our district courts, often the first point of interface, right, between any citizen and the Indian court, really. It's also an explicit commentary on the additional funds that need to be harnessed to make these spaces more accessible and safe. That's, in fact, what I want to tell you is that is the thing about good quality data, right? It enables conversation on any subject. It elevates the conversation also and allows for so many more views to come in. Now that's that with judicial data. Now moving on to MSMEs. This is a sector that I've been working on for a while now. Micro, small, and medium enterprises. It's an acronym for micro, small, and medium enterprises, MSMEs. I have written with a senior colleague on this in various platforms, hoping to put the spotlight on our findings about the sector. MSMEs provide employment to 114 million people, is the second largest employer after agriculture in this country. It contributes 30% of India's GDP, gross domestic product. Close to half of India's exports also come from this sector. There is a real challenge, however, despite the enormity and despite the importance of this sector. Here is a very basic problem with it. You can't identify them. you literally cannot identify 63.4 million enterprises, of which 99% are micro. That is, they're very small. That is, they employ either they're self-employed people or they employ up to 5 workers. Nobody can identify them. All right. It's a largely informal workforce is what we understand from various other studies that have not just relied on, data, the minutia that exists, that is hovering around, in government databases, but have actually gone down to the field and done this, research themselves, qualitative and so on. Most of it is informal in nature. A dedicated census for this sector was probably done 13 to 14 years back. It was in the year 2006-07. So that is the figure that we continue using today. So the 63.4 is actually from there. After that, we don't know how many have, literally just they're either stunted, they aren't growing. We don't know the life cycle of these enterprises. We don't know how many have died due to the introduction of GST, right? Or say demonetization. It could have wiped out so many of them. Or many, many more micro enterprises could have ballooned. We don't know. Information across these enterprises is presently scattered across, like I said, it's hovering around various government databases. There is the Udyog Aadhaar Memorandum, which is, a registration platform for them. But it's, again, if you want to register, you need to come forward. It's not mandatory. And therefore, people choose to remain outside the, that whole net coming within the purview of the government, etc. They choose not to. So they just stay out of it and they don't register. And therefore, nobody knows about them. There's another data set, again, that is self-certified information called the MSME Data Bank. There also you will find one number of how many enterprises exist. You don't know if both of them have registered in the same portal, by the way. Whether there's double counting also, we don't know. Then after the introduction of GSTN, we now have the Goods and Services Tax Network also. But those are, of course, for those who earn above a certain threshold, 40 lakhs and so on. So that's that. Those are not the really small ones. Our research on the sector that we have followed for quite a while now also suffers, right? Because of the lack of information that we have. For a paper that we were writing on MSMEs, and I'm just focusing on a narrative that I know because it's from personal experience, and therefore might be sort of more interesting for you. We were writing a paper on MSMEs in the Delhi NCR region until we realized that the only way to actually assess them is to build a repository on them ourselves, right? So we manually went to every single district report in Delhi NCR, manually added the number of districts, the number of enterprises by district, manually added the employment within them, manually searched for, which subsectors, these people employ most, etc. During a conversation, now after all this was done, during a conversation with one of the district officials in charge of MSMEs in the state, he mentioned that even the district reports have only approximate figures. So he said, please don't rely on them because we only don't know the accuracy of them. So now after doing this entire exercise, we realized that even this was approximate, and therefore our entire reduction will have to say that these are only approximate findings. Now, this is just one example of how there is a lot of ground to cover in terms of just collecting data about these acutely important sectors of the Indian economy, right? All right. Now, next slide, please. Yeah. Now, the infrastructure, both central and at disaggregated levels, that are used to collect information and data are crucial to any government, are crucial to the trust that citizens have in the government, right? Now, to this end, it is pivotal that, as many of you know, India will soon have a data protection law. Although this is being said for a couple of years now, so we're still waiting for it to be enacted. But hopefully soon, once there is a data protection law, it ought to protect every individual, every individual's privacy, right, of information that both the government collects and private organizations collect. So, be it when you use a flight booking portal, when you use Zomato, when you use Uber, or when you, onboard, for instance, the Uday scheme or the APY, right, or any initiative of the government. Ideally, the law should protect you against all these instances where you give any information about yourself. Timely collection is something that I have mentioned before. All headline figures that you see, in newspapers, 90% enrollment, 85% achievement in so and so scheme. Very largely politically driven, right? You must ask as young individuals, where is this data from? When is this data from? How long has it been collected for? Did they start counting from 0 subscribers and enrollments? Or were there already some people there? Because for all you know, there might be a previous scheme that they have just scrapped to just put a new name on it, right? And therefore you need to have the ability to question these kinds of very commonsensical yet very important sort of aspects of public policy actions. Third is data integration. This is also very important. Now, across levels of administration in this country, there are multiple data points. They're probably even repetitive. They may probably even be collected at the state level by central organizations. Apart from these, they may also be collected by private organizations. They may be reporting on literally the same question. Now, ideally, these must be integrated using various platforms. I think they're generally called application programming interface, APIs. Ideally, they should be integrated across data pipelines, across applications, across devices even. This has begun in full earnest. In a lot of work that we have done, we have realized this has begun, but it needs to be scaled evenly across state governments also. That's still a challenge that I think is yet to be addressed. Next is the capacity to collect and analyze data. Again, this is crucial. Consistent training and capacity building of surveyors, statisticians who analyze data on the government side, of course, but also on the researchers side, right? The ability to test, question government data and information is paramount. So you have to be able to build that capacity. And it's a consistent sort of building capacity approach, because the kind of data that comes in, the volume that comes in is really ballooning by the day. So that's that. I want to end this session with some general misconceptions about data. We all know that data tells a story, and this is generally what is communicated to us. But judging the credibility of that story is really left to us. So in whatever sectors, I understand that many of you are still undergraduates, and I just want to say that in whatever sectors you choose to pursue your careers in, spend time understanding the data you see in news, at work, when you discuss it with friends, when you discuss it with relatives. Don't rely on headline figures. That's what they want you to believe. You need to check for base figures. Like I said, when is this data from? Where did it start from? What is the journey it's taken, right? Trends in growth, therefore, check the sample used to collect this data. Who are these people who are giving you these answers, right? The World Bank, for instance, had to scrap one of its possibly the most well-known indices of all time that state governments, ease of doing business, if the state governments have used it, the central government used to use it, they had to scrap it because of certain anomalies in their very, very well-known, very popular, very well-regarded index itself. Try to question who answers these survey questions in the data collection process, right? Think of whether there was also an alternate way to have collected, measured, or analyzed this data. In a sense, I think developing the habit of questioning and critiquing, not just based on popular opinion, which is the easiest to do, but using analytical thinking is really key. And as younger individuals, we need to develop that capacity to do so. All right. Data matters in public policy to a tremendous extent in the present day. There is no doubt about it. It is literally the pivot around which many, many actions, many decisions are taken. It has allowed ordinary citizens like us also to have an opinion on government actions, right? It's what you hear and what you read that you sort of use to build an opinion on your MP or your MLA or the government per se. So it's allowed us that so far, and we must continue to engage in active debates, hold our governments accountable. It's also something that you must do, hold them accountable using the data they put out. But this will really only happen when you begin engaging with the data that you're presented with. So whenever you see an announcement, start questioning what this is. Where are they getting these numbers from? PIB, for instance, you have these Press Information Bureau releases. Sorry, excuse me, please. And you need to look at these releases, not just look at the figures. You need to ask, where is this information from? Is there an alternate source for this information? It can't be just a press release. It's coming from somewhere. Where is it from, right? So this kind of sort of engagement with everything you see, especially data, especially what the government puts out, but also what private organizations put out, will be necessary. All right. And with that, I end my lecture today, and happy to take any questions that you may have.
I'm opening the session for questions. Yashu.
Hi,
And then
thank
Ritik.
you. Am I audible?
Yes, you are, Ritik. Yashu.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for the really informative lecture, ma'am.
Sorry to come
I
here.
have
Just
this
can
one question.
anybody switch off, close the presentation so that we can.
I'll do that. I'll do that.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. So I had this question. So while I was analyzing this policy, this actually Act of Transgender Persons Act of 2019, I realized that even you were talking about the 2011 census and how it's a really great census in quite a lot of other manners, but not in the transgender policy manner. So because the gender population was only calculated as an other population, not really gender specific as transgender.
Right.
So there was incorrectness, sort of. There was this it was not quite correct. The data was not quite correct. But even despite of that, presumptions were made on this, and then budgets were allocated throughout the year. So in 2016, they said we're gonna give about, I think the estimated budget that they had to allot, but they did not really do that, was 14 crores, and then that went down to 5 crores, and then that finally in 2019, when they finally did revise the budget and then allocated, it turned out to be 1 crore. So how is it that government constantly or even any other agency, when they're forming these policies and allocating budgets, how is it that the same data tends to be revised and the budget allocated, even based on the same data, tends to be constantly changing and being revised?
So there's something called a stakeholder consultation process that is held before. You mentioned the Act, right? So when there is a bill, there is also mandatorily to be a stakeholder consultation process. Generally, typically, I think these kind of issues come up during this process. And I think it's very suspect and highly odd that this hasn't come up. I think it's it's wonderful that you're bringing this up now. I also have colleagues who have looked at this earlier at NITFP, and this is true. What you're highlighting is absolutely true, and I have heard this before. But typically, one hopes that the stakeholder consultation process addresses this, but it hasn't in this instance, and that is a massive failure on the front of the government, I think. Yeah.
Ritik.
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes, Ritik.
Elaborate the procedure of data collection by World Bank or different organization which report data like data on hunger, literacy, or on these issues.
Well, different organizations, depends on what kind of organizations you're talking about. The government has a different process it follows. It may use national sample surveys to do so. It has, the family health survey to collect this kind of information. There is also the census, which collects this information every 10 years. Private organizations have their own way of doing so, depending on their methodology, really, or whether they're collecting qualitative data on these aspects. So, there isn't really one straightforward answer to this, Ritik. I think you must compare different surveys, methodologies used by different organizations to actually arrive at this answer. With respect to the World Bank, though, the methodology is quite well understood. There are a certain set of CEOs of companies who are asked one template of questions. The same questions are asked to a handful of CEOs of companies. And it is generally based on that the ease of doing business index is generated for a particular region.
Thank you, ma'am.
No problem, Ritik.
Dwani?
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
I actually wanted to know, this is really important. How can someone, point out discrepancies in data? I mean, there are many times when government records are manipulated or so, and many, not just government. How do you point out discrepancies and realize that something is not correct over here?
I think one way to do it that we use, and I've seen many economists use in teams that I've worked in, is that you look at the same information that is collected by different organizations, right? You come down to actually looking at the methodology. If there is the same or even a similar question that is asked to a particular household or to a particular individual, you want to check why there is a difference in answers. Is it because of geographic location? Is it because they were looking at other variables like income, for instance? Are they both from different, income levels? Is that why their answers differ? Other extraneous factors like this. But this is a very valid question because you must assess different data sets that capture similar or same information. And in all probability, most of the time they will exist. All right. Another thing to do, which we do quite a bit, especially when we worked in an IPFP, was look at quantitative data, but also look at qualitative data. So actively search for, and you will also find this, it might not be for the exact specific region you're looking at, may not be for, let's say, Andhra Pradesh state of India, right, where you have quantitative data and the same qualitative data alongside. But you might find it for the state of Kerala, for instance, all right, or for another country altogether. That is also important. You also want to see whether quantitative data on particular variables are matching the reasons why people say they've given specific answers. All right, so that is another way that we use to look at conflicting information on the same count.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
No problem, Dwani.
Ariraj?
Good evening, ma'am.
Hi.
I want, as you all know, ma'am, the census forms the backbone of policy forming in India, and especially in times of internet, as we are moving toward e-governance, it will play a more vital role. So, do you think, ma'am, the time frame of census, that is, it is conducted every 10 years, is still viable now? And can it, in a country like India, we can have more frequent census?
No, but in a country like India, I would argue that doing a census even once every 2 years is a massive exercise. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of personnel to go across the length and breadth of this country to collect information on every house. It's not an easy task. So I think it is for that reason that a considerable time period has been kept in between these, sort of lapse. But also, having said that, this time actually it ought to have been done in 2021, but obviously it's been delayed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But this time, apparently, they're doing a digital census. Of course, one doesn't know the status of this also. It was just an announcement, and then we don't know what happened after. But this time, I think the way in which they're taking, they're collecting information is slightly different. However, it's not even 10 years anymore, it's gone beyond that now. So I think we'll just have to make do with that. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
Anukriti and Rhythm.
Hi, good evening, ma'am. I had a specific question in relation to a recent issue that was brought up, I think, in October last year when the global hunger index was challenged by the government, saying that they've not used the right methodologies. So my question was that there was no specific reasons highlighted by the government itself in making that statement. But if we go by the government standards, then every data that comes across is actually incorrect or a false picture. So in that case, how do we actually know which data is actually accurate and say judge if a policy is actually making any difference?
Yeah, I mean, so I loop it back to what was asked to me earlier along the same lines, actually. Like I mentioned during my presentation also, India's statistical architecture is actually very vast and impressive. And I literally just gave you a snapshot of a few organizations that are involved in capturing almost every aspect of an Indian's life. Okay, so the architecture per se is fantastic and it has served us well for 75 years. We mustn't forget that. So to say that their records are fudged or false or, not good, it's too generalized a statement. What we do is that we go policy by policy, right? So if somebody says, do a post facto assessment of APY, we look at only the APY. Okay, or somebody says, look at, how infrastructure investment has panned out in the past 5 years. We only look at that. A generic state, but our findings are also therefore, then they vary depending on what we are assessing. I don't think it's a consistent finding on our part that it has not been good. And I also don't think I mentioned that in my PPT. Our consistent finding has not been that there is bad quality data. Many of it is good quality data. There is always, however, room for improvement. And that room for improvement is what people like us, researchers like us, or people who have this sort of information with us must sort of disseminate further, right? So I think that is the attitude to bear as a young individual, right?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we have the rest of the questions together so that maybe Amrita can respond to all of them together, because there might be some overlaps between what people want to ask. Deeksha?
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am, for the session. I'm coming from a non-policy background. So, for example, if I want to analyze the position of a scheme like Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, can you tell me how can I assess the data, or what kind of data I should be looking into? Because sometimes when I go to website, I don't clearly see that availability of data. So as a layman, what do you suggest how I can look for the data and understand the implementation of these schemes?
All right. Yeah, okay. Any other questions?
Akriti?
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you for such an informative session. Ma'am, my question was related to representation. One of us asked about transgender folks, and the data that has been messed up really badly. So, what do you think? What is your take on the representation in the committee that forms the data, that formulates the data? So, what is your take on that, and how should we ensure representation, and how should we check that? Thank you so much.
Sanjeevani?
Yes, ma'am. I had a question that could you recommend some, or could you please tell us your personal favorite databases in terms of quality, in terms of the, user friendliness of the website, the database?
All right.
Abhinav and Brahmneet. That's all we will take today.
My question just got slotted in between. I just have a small question. You said my name, but it got lost in the sequence.
Okay. Go ahead, Ritu.
Okay. So I just wanted to ask, I mean, with respect to the quality of the data, do we include the statistical, like technical aspects of data as to the sample size of with respect to the study population? How do we considering it from a non-mathematical background, non-statistical background, how do you inculcate that into the quality of data, and how do you use that as an aspect?
All right. So shall I start with answering the questions, Dr. Sapra?
Ma'am, can I ask the question?
Okay, the last question then.
Yeah, I just want, like you talked about the data protection law that is supposed to be coming out, and obviously the government will be formulating the policy, and it's supposed to be, like, generally speaking, it's supposed to be protect the citizens against, all those multinationals using the data and all. But a lot of times the government itself uses the data, but it protects itself, saying national interest and all other things. So do any private actors or any such bodies come into play when such acts are formed, as data protection again, where government itself can use the data wrongly? Like, how does one regulate the government itself when such acts and such data is being used?
All right.
Excuse me, ma'am. I had one question. I'm Abhinav. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
So my question is more related to data collection. Say now we have various methods and organizations who collect data, but it's still highly centralized process where only currently in India we have only two, NSSO and CSO. So only these two collect. So if and collecting on a large major scale, such as for census of India, which should have happened in 2021, it didn't happen due to the pandemic, and then shifted. So instead of one organization collecting for the whole of India, it could be that we can have smaller, we can break down that institution, have small outlets spread out all over the country, and then the data collection will be much more faster, easier, it will be cost effective, labor effective in that aspect. What do you think of that, ma'am?
All right.
Okay, we will not take any more questions after this. I will request Amrita to please respond to that.
Yes. So the first question was on how to, for instance, analyze data on, say, the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao campaign, right? Here's what I would do. I would first go to the official ministry website, all right? You go to their website, you start collecting all the information that they have put up, all right? Once you do that, you might also want to look at, apart from the fact that you want to see how the scheme has done, you also want to see, and you must always do this, you must always look at the finances involved in schemes. It is very, very important. What you will also understand when you look at many schemes is slowly you will start developing this habit of actually thinking, oh, Atal Pension Yojana had this much money pumped in. Oh, but this campaign has probably a fraction of that. Why is that? Or, Uday had this much money pumped in, but this scheme has only, half of that. Why is the case? So I always recommend that when you look at, statistics of an initiative or a scheme or whatever it is itself, right? In Beti Bachao, it will be, how many children in the age of so and so made it to school, etc., or stayed on in school or left school. You also want to look at the money that has consistently been pumped in alongside these statistics. You also want to probably look at the annual reports that the ministry will put out, right? Download these annual reports. More often than not, they will also have the financial accounts, section in them. So cull out that information for the same years, all right? Once you're done with looking at government data, always rely on official sources only. Which is gov.in IDs. Once you're done with that, I would recommend doing your own research parallelly. All right. So go to good platforms that will give you good, solid, credible research done on these kind of big, schemes, right? So JSTOR could be one, EPW is one. Just even if it's doing a general Google research, reading, understanding what people have been saying about these schemes, how they have been performing over time. Try and also look for different commentary at different points in time. So you want to see what a person said in 2013 versus what a person just said a year back. Has it changed? Has that commentary, the general commentary around the scheme changed? Similarly for studies, any qualitative studies that have been undertaken, in states that you think might be the general suspects of not performing well in such schemes, right? Maybe something in the, like Haryana, Punjab, generally, typically what states might not be performing well. Immediately, these are keywords for you. search for qualitative research on these fronts. Once you have all this information in place, keep them in front of you. Start building an Excel sheet for yourself, right? Check for trends yourself. Even if ministry document says that there has been growth of 40%, check for where this 40% is coming from. Don't just write 40% in the Excel sheet you are building. Go down to the base figures that were used to actually say that there was a 40% growth in girl children going to school, right? This is the kind of in-depth sort of pursuit of knowledge itself, for the lack of a better word, that you should get used to when you want to build an opinion for yourself. All right. So yeah, that's what I would say about the Beti Bachao question and how to sort of think of assessing the scheme itself. All right. Next question is on representation, transgender representation. What was earlier brought up. You mentioned that the committee that formulates this data itself might not have good representation. This is a very important aspect because the nuances of every community might not be known. Every community or every class of citizens might not be known to everybody but them, and that is also a reason that representation is necessary, be it for women, be it for minorities, be it for the physically challenged people. Wherever there is somebody who is disadvantaged or vulnerable, you always want representation from that community in these kind of key committees that are drawing data about them, or that are developing possible solutions that will change, that will impact their lives also. So I think it's a very important point that you raised. However, I want to loop back to what I said earlier. When a bill is drafted, it is also subject to, and one hopes that this is the case, a strong stakeholder consultation process. It is during this interlude between a bill becoming an act. How it becomes an act is when it is passed in both houses of the parliament, right? So it is in the interlude between a bill and an act that actually it is open to society. So everybody, including you and I, and representatives of the community that is going to be impacted itself, anybody can come and give their suggestions, can come and give their comments, and the government has to take them into account. All right. So that is typically what is followed, and it is hoped that they will put their case forward, or at least have the the ability and the access to do so during this course. Although it's a very important point that you raised about representation, I fully agree with you. All right. The next one is about personal favorite databases. I don't have any personal favorite databases. I think the CMI database is very, very rich because, like I said, it's high frequency data. So you also quickly, it helps you sort of keep pace with changes, whether it's employment, whether it's, moving from agriculture to industry to somewhere else. It's very good. It's high frequency data. So, but it's paid for, unfortunately. So that would be a favorite database, but you might not be able to access it. However, do visit their website, please. CMIE's website. It's a very good website. All right. Technical aspects of data. Again, a very important question, how I have built the capacity to do so. Of course, my master's course at TIS itself had a whole course on data analysis and public finance, etc. So I sort of, my interest in numbers specifically, I could sort of learn what to do with it because I already had the training for it. Through my job, I didn't have a choice but to learn also how to work with this. So I had to learn, for instance, softwares like R, or Stata was already taught to us, but R, SPSS, etc. So yeah. Sorry. So what I was saying is that it might be nice for you to build capacity. There are tons of courses, educational courses, that you can take on various platforms now. Pay a small fee. Sometimes it's also free. Learn it. That's probably the best way to technically look at these data sets, right? Learn it yourself. That might be a good way to go about it.
Is there some one tool that you'd suggest? I mean, there's R, Python, Strata. There's a lot of that out there.
You
Which
can
one?
just, yeah, but you can just go to, for instance, Coursera or edX and just search for, multiple courses on this and choose one that they also have like beginners and different levels, so if you're a beginner, you can choose that level and start. Yeah.
For languages, like for example, R,
yeah,
or Python, I
Yeah.
mean, is there any one language or any one tool that is more widely applicable than the other?
In the work that I have done, I see R being used very, very much.
Okay.
So that might be a nice one to do, but also Stata, because it's also, I've realized, slightly easier. I don't know how many people agree, but that's also a good one. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I would, have you answered all the questions, Amrita?
No, I have two more, Dr. Sapra.
Okay. I'm just worried about, you have been speaking for such a long time. So,
No, that's fine.
Just answer them briefly and we'll.
Yes. Do private bodies come into play when acts are brought in? Again, like I said, private bodies do come in because, like I said, the stakeholder consultation process is meant for this. It is meant for, different organizations, different individuals, society, anybody can literally write in with suggestions once a bill is displayed, publicly. So yes, private bodies do write. And yes, in the course of a few committees that I've worked on, working groups, for instance, that have worked on bills, I have seen that many of them send in their representatives. Many of their representations are taken into account when we think of how to draft a law or think of how to draft an amendment to a law. These are all taken into account because finally, once an act comes into implementation, it's going to affect these people. And be it, if it's an act, under the finance bill, for instance, if you have something that, affects an industry, you do want to take into account how they're going to be impacted, right? So you want to ensure that what you're drafting actually, eases out the implementation of the law for them once it's there. So absolutely, this is taken into account, surely. All right. The data collection process is centralized. Can it be decentralized? Given the fact that we already have a centralized architecture in place, I don't think I'm qualified enough to answer this question. It's already an enormous architecture, and it's been in existence for several decades now. I don't think I'm qualified to answer what it would take to disaggregate this. How much money it would take, how many more personnel it would take, how many statisticians, once the data comes in, because surveyors are doing the job of collecting. After that, there is somebody to analyze this. And, for instance, the periodic labor force survey, there's somebody actually sitting and analyzing this data. So I'm not sure.
But it is already decentralized. But aggregation has to be done it is already decentralized. Now, aggregation has to be done at the central level. This is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I'm not sure how this would play out. I don't think I'm qualified enough to talk about it.
No, what I'm saying, Amrita, somebody has to collate together for one report. It's because the report is for the country.
Yeah.
Report, though it may start from district and village level at the sense block level, but it has to be aggregated into one report. So data collection is already centralized at the state and the district level. Collection part.
Yeah. No, but what I'm saying is that I don't know what it would take to for each state to start having its own office, for instance, the DES, to start doing what the NSSO does, and then also analyze it and put out information. I simply don't know if they do have their own system, the DES, the Directorate of Economics and Statistics, but those are state statistics.
I think even the ISI also does
Asim
this.
sir, can I answer?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Asim sir, can I answer this question?
अरे भाई क्यों नहीं आंसर करे करिए बिल्कुल.
So basically we already have decentralized system, and in NSS also we collect central sample and state sample also. Generally what you use is the central sample. What the report which you read is based on the central sample. It is up to the state whether they can publish the any report using the state sample also, and some of the state does, like Delhi does, like Rajasthan does. Okay, and likewise, as Professor Asim has already told, that census is also a decentralized process. Every single state has their own offices. They collect the data. They send it to the central RGI, the Registrar General of India. They compile it and then produce you the final reports. So it's already decentralized mechanism. And for health related data, you have National Family Health Survey, which is produced by IIPS. So that is also decentralized process. Every state has to collect the data, send it to the Mumbai, then Mumbai compile it. So every single data sets which we have in India, secondary data sets, it is already decentralized system. The final output which we receive is in centralized form.
Okay. Okay, I think no, Abhinav, I'm sorry, I'll have to stop you because this session, I know it is very interesting, and if you want to know more about it, please apply to the for the MA Master's Program in Public Policy and Governance. I'm sure you'll get you'll have courses and you'll have heartful and handful and bag full of things to discuss and talk about once you apply to for the course. All right. Okay. So thank you very much, Amrita. That was an impeccably, well-crafted session. I would like to, and as the students would have understood that data is not just about numbers, and as Amrita said, it's not just a story. I would say it's a complex web, and that one has to unravel. It is multi-layered, and therefore, what talking back to the data is as much important as just looking and understanding it. I think what she has also very beautifully spoken about is the data accountability. I think we as all of you as young individuals and as responsible citizens should also look into this whole idea of data accountability, look at and engage with data in a very critical manner. Thank you, Amrita, for giving examples from all different practical, domains of life, whether it is the e-courts or the Zomato delivery person. So, it is so easy to connect the dots when you give so many examples. So, thank you so much for taking time out, and for all the students, perhaps she's one of our brightest stars, and it is so good to see see a student who, I mean, few days back also she was a student. I would see her hanging out in the campus with all her friends, and today such a speaking like, I mean, she is a very seasoned professional, but speaking with so much clarity that it fills us with enormous pride. And I guess this is where we would want all our students to finally arrive when they do the courses like this and also evolve as professionals like Amrita. Thank you so much, Amrita.
Thank you, Dr. Safra, and thank you, Dr. Asim.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Okay,
guys.
so
Thanks for attending. Bye-bye.
I think that it's it's always an immense moment of pride, no? When the students do better than yourself. So that's how I see this lecture as that. I think that, and now when we go to the next session, so now there's a reversal of relationship here. Amrita was our student, and I'm a student of Dr. Amir Khan. So there's a reversal of relationship here. So, sir, thank you so much for joining us. And I really don't know, I will not have enough words to introduce Dr. Khan, because if you name the public policy school in India, and he'll be found there taking some classes or teaching somebody there, whether it's Ashoka, whether it's Jindal, whether it's TISS, whether it's currently he's coordinating a course on economics for the civil servants in Hyderabad, the foundation course in civil servants. He teaches at several institutions. He's one of our most sought after faculty also at TISS, but he teaches at several institutions, including ISB and several other places. But besides that, his professional achievements, which are many, ranging, so working with several governments, to central union government to the state governments, He has worked for Sachar Committee report. He has worked for a corresponding report which came out in Telangana. So there's a lot of professional achievements which one can keep on narrating here. But what I really want to share with you about him is his ability to relate to the students. So even if he meets for half an hour, 40 minutes with this cohort of students, the students are always talking about him, getting in touch with him, talking, asking him more and more doubts. And that's the unique ability of a teacher. So, so whatever I may do in my life or write, whatever I may, I'll always be a student for him, because I always look towards him to learn from him. And that's what Amir is all about. So thank you so much, Amir Baisa, for coming here. And I am sure that you will have another cohort of policy fan following from here, from today onwards. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Asim. Thanks, Ipshita. And particularly, thanks to Amrita, because she, actually gave the right cue for me to talk about what I'm going to. Amrita, it was wonderful. I wasn't planning on eavesdropping, but I came in and I was quite mesmerized towards the end. And the questions that came, and that's why I posted a little thing I wrote a couple of days ago on the whole data issue. And some of your questions were pertaining to that. I do a column on these things in the Mint, and the last one was on data, incidentally.
I'll definitely check it out.
Thanks. But wonderful. I mean, this is, this time I reached out to Asim and Ipshita saying, what a wonderful idea to do this workshop. And if I could, be part of this exercise. And they readily agreed. So here I am, hoping to talk to you for the next 40 minutes, so that the timing I've promised Ipshita that we'll restore the timing to where it was. The question that I'm addressing, that Ipshita asked me to, is one of the central questions in policy, and that is, or the set of questions, which is what, why, and how to measure. So let me quickly go across to a set of slides I have, which look at this issue. And the question on measurement is a very significant question. And let me start off by saying, my last formal boss was a pretty famous guy. I'm sure, if not all of you, a lot of you have heard his name. My last boss was Bill Gates. Familiar name, isn't it? So Bill, in most of our meetings, would make this very strong statement. And at first, it sounded very garish, and it sounded as if he was being a little too dismissive when he used to say, and listen to this very carefully, I'm quoting him, his constant refrain was, what you can't measure, don't do it. Don't do what you can't measure. So his entire policy perspective was that everything is guided by measurement. And if it cannot be estimated, if it cannot be measured, if it cannot be converted into units, don't do it. Now that's a harsh statement. So do you work for happiness? Well, you can't in the Bill framework because you can't measure it. But that was his constant question. Whenever we went to him with whenever anybody applied for any grant, the question was, how will you measure the impact? And in the public policy space, that has now become a very standard practice. That the first thing you see when you look at a new policy initiative is, so how are you going to measure the impact? And that is what brings me, or that is where I start, which is, what is policy? I'm sure you've heard this through the day, But let me repeat that for my own vested interest, which is, what is policy? Is policy a set of ideas? Or is it a set of plans? Is it the overall plan, or is it a set of principles that are used to enunciate a policy? The farm laws. Is the policy the set of 3 farm laws, or is it the principle of reforming agriculture in whatever fashion? Or is it the guidelines that follow? Right? Think of this. This is the fundamental question in policy. That is policy a set of ideas, or is it a set of plans, or is it the grid, the overall game plan, or is it a set of ethics, principles, morals, ideology that defines what you're going to do, or is it just the guidelines that follow the passing of the act in the 2 houses that Amrita was talking about? Now, keep that question in mind, and I further add to that by saying that the next level of looking at defining policy is that policy is a set of ideas. It is the plan, but very importantly, it is the implementation. It is the monitoring, and it is the measurement of the impact. Somewhere you map stakeholders because they are important in setting the plans, but the 5 most important constituents of policy are the ideas, the plan, the implementation, the monitoring, and the measurement of the impact. And each one of them has, if not equal, has a substantial weightage. Without any one of those, the policy just collapses. Now, here is where I want to ask you a couple of questions. And don't unmute yourself and start talking. But what I want all of you to do is to just use that chat window and answer this question. My first question to all of you is that forget about what we've just spoken, what the definition of policy is, etc., etc. Just think of the policies that you are familiar with. All of you, you've heard of some policies, you've come across some policies, maybe some of you have implemented some policy, possibly written a few policies, at least thought of a few. My simple question to all of you is, in the last 70 years or so of policy making, name your favorite policy. Which policy do you think was the best policy ever? Whatever heuristics, don't worry about why you're saying this, right? Any policy, right to information, midday meal, national TOD, I don't know that, midday meal, LPG, yeah, quick, let's have a quick thing, LPG, right to information, right to education, NEP, okay, the transit-oriented development, okay, Manrega, Indira Awas, Jan Sevika in Karnataka, Manrega, MP Lads, Jan Dhan, Green Revolution, well done, I'm very impressed, that was very quick. Economic reforms of 91, Food Security Act, Sarv Shiksha. All right. Any others? Make in India, White Revolution, Digital India, consumer rights, wonderful. I mean, some new ones coming up. Free vaccines, excellent. Yeah. I mean, the current foreign policy is an interesting addition to that. Very often people are asking whether there is a current foreign policy. Okay, Ayushman, Poshan, skills, criminal policy reforms, very good. Ayush, that's a new one. All right. So thanks for that, right? Thanks for reacting to that so quickly and giving me a wide set of policies. Now let me ask the second question. Some of you must have possibly guessed my second question. But if you haven't, this one is a little more serious, a little more difficult question, and a little mischievous question. But I want you to do the same thing. I want you to quickly write for me what you think, what in your opinion was the most useless policy, was the worst policy. Go ahead, use the same mind you used. Demonetization, CAA, demonetization, immigration, data protection, farm laws, demonetization, right? Farm bills, UAPA, excellent. And one of you has GST there, wonderful. Population control in UP, yeah. One child. Whereas Srikar Reddy says there is nothing that is the worst. Did you give the same answer to nothing is the best? Or there you had an answer? 370. Okay, wonderful. The Land Sealing Act, the Insolvency Code. Wonderful. I am very impressed. The worst policy has far quicker and far more answers than the best policy. Good enough. Crypto regulation. Aadhaar itself. Interesting. Thank you. We'll stop that here. Why did I make you do this exercise? The reason for that is the reason for this talk. You know, if you look at what good policies are, you will find that good policies are, and this is our first lesson in policy making that we make, that a good policy is a policy that has, and I'm making a very simple statement here, a good policy is one that has one simple, clear objective. Let me repeat that. A good policy is a policy that has one simple, clear objective. You know, the reason you chose, or most of you choose RTI, RTE, Manrega, why do you choose these as good policies? Let me ask you my third question. I'm very fond of this Manrega example. I'm not saying I'm very fond of the policy, but I'm very fond of the example because very often it shows up as a good policy. You're all, most of you are very young, but still, you know, you have seen the Manrega, the Narega, as it was, come up and has stood the test of time for now about 15, 16 years. Does anyone know what the objective of Narega was? Write a phrase. What was the objective of Narega? Why was Narega enacted? Wrong. Provide employment was not the case. The objective of Narega. You know, it might have provided employment. 360 days, fixed income, wages to poor, livelihood, reduce poverty, vocational training, equity. No minimum wage, not a guarantee, not a wage gap, not rural development, not skilling, not the development of rural areas, not the right to work, though it did start that argument. Increase money flow, no. Keep people busy, smart answer. Assurity of income, economic development, equality, GDP growth. No, none of this. Self-reliance. You know, most of what you're writing was the process. Providing employment, giving 100 days of wages. That was the process. The end result was something else. Political appeasement. I'm talking of the stated objective, right? It was there in the act itself. Social inclusion, income guarantee, reduce pressure on agriculture. No. Well, so let me clarify. Imad Hussain has raised his hand, but I'm not allowing you to speak. You can write on the chat window. The answer, very simply, was to mitigate distress migration, to reduce distress migration. There was no other reason. It might have, Manrega might have reduced poverty. It might have, got people employment. It might have helped some people get skills. It might have built rural roads somewhere. But the purpose of Manrega was to reduce distress migration. It had one single objective. And that's the reason for its success. Because then it was easy to measure. Did distress migration go down post Manrega? Oh, you bet it did. And therefore, it's a good policy. Simple. Did it add to rural infrastructure? Well, it was not meant to add to rural infrastructure. Did it help agriculture? It wasn't supposed to help agriculture. What it said it would do, in very simple terms, in measurable terms, it allowed you the right to education. What did RTE do? RTE's objective was very simple. RTE said every child in India who's between 6 to 14-year-old should be in school. End of the matter. Should she be in a good school? No. Should she get educated and become a space scientist? No. Should the age of marriage go up because of that? No. The simple objective was she should be in school. That's it. And 97% of our children are now in school between the age of 6 to 14. So you bet it is successful. What was the objective of right to information? Transparency in governance. That's it. Transparency in governance. Did it provide transparency in governance? Most people think so, because it allowed them to file a RTI application and get some data. That is the reason you are all choosing those policies. And that's the reason you are saying they're good policies. Take demonetization. Why does it win hands down in the bad policy poll? Almost everybody says demonetization. It's 4 years since demonetization. Does anyone know of the objective of demonetization? Did we know it on that day in November when it was announced? For the next 60 days, every day a new objective was announced. Meant to curb tax crime, meant to curb cash in the system, meant to improve plastic money, meant to reduce terrorism in Kashmir, Naxalism in Jharkhand. Every day was a new objective. And it's not surprising that when you have multiple objectives, you meet none of them. That's a life lesson also, by the way. Right? In public policy, you have to be Arjuna. It is the eye of the fish that is important. Nothing else is. If you hit that eye, you are successful. Oh, well, what have you achieved by doing that? That's a separate issue. But I decided I will go and do it, and I did it. That's the reason why it is important to have a clear objective that can be measured. As simple and as straightforward as that. Farm laws. What did the farm laws aim to do? Were they meant to get remunerative income to farmers? Were they meant to double farmers' income? Were they meant to help corporatize farming? Was it meant to reduce disputes under the Agriculture Act? Was it supposed to reduce the negotiation time? Read those three and you can get 20 objectives of them. And that is why you often hear this very simple thing, that if you want a good policy, start off with writing a simple, measurable objective. That was the core purpose of this session. And wherever we did that, look at the vaccination story, right? COVID vaccination. On vaccination policy, what is our objective? Our objective is simple: vaccinate everybody. Everybody above the age of 18. We are now at some 55%. Were we successful? No. We said we will vaccinate everybody by December 21. We vaccinated half the population, and that's why we have such a high prevalence of Omicron today. Polio. Vaccinate every child. 200 million children will be vaccinated within 6 months. That's it. We went around, went to every possible hamlet, every hill, every hillock, every desert, and vaccinated everybody. Was the polio vaccination policy successful? You bet it was. NACO, HIV/AIDS. One policy was, a very simple policy was, distribute condoms. All around along the HIV route, which started from Bombay and ended in Namakkal, you distribute condoms to truck drivers. What do they do with condoms? We don't care. We ensured that everybody has access to a condom along that route. Was that successful? Of course it was. Did it reduce prevalence of HIV/AIDS? Yes, it did. So that's my story. That's really the simple point that I want to make to you all today. That the most important part of policy and the most neglected part of policy is writing a measurable objective. That's really the core component of a policy. And that is where we falter. Midday meal scheme. What was the idea of a midday meal scheme? The idea of a midday meal scheme was one hot meal for every kid who goes to school.
I divide my...
One hot meal for every kid who goes to school. Now, will that result in better education, better cognition, higher gross enrollment ratio in universities, better gender equity? No, that's not the purpose of the midday meal. And that's why it's among your favorite schemes. The core components really are these. You look at the data, you highlight the urgency of a problem, do it because it is urgent. And you can prove urgency by measuring the reason. You know, last year, one of the reasons most of us were dumbfounded at the labor law reform was that right in the middle of a pandemic, when we have 130 million people unemployed and walking on the roads, was that the right time to push for labor reform? Was there an urgency to push for labor reform halfway through a pandemic when there was increased hunger and unprecedented unemployment? It was the timing that caused people such consternation. The data I'm not going to talk about, Amrita spoke about it. So the important part of a policy paper are that when you make your recommendations, you tell us what are the pros and cons of that policy and what are the outcomes. You have to tell us how that impact will be measured. That is how you are going to give us a good policy. Any policy that you make, any policy that you enact, must have a clear metric. And that is the importance of this session that we are talking about. That is the importance of all policy. By the way, I'm just getting into one of those issues, which is that, one core component of policy is implementation. Very often you hear this very lazy criticism of policy saying, oh, we make great policy, but implementation is poor. The simple thing that any policy academic will tell you is that a good policy is a policy that has implementation built in. It is not something else. It is not another animal. It is a very lazy way of blaming those who implement. Usually it is the legislators who blame the executive. That, we wrote a great policy, but you implemented it poorly. That again is something that comes out of the fact that because we do not focus on measure. If the policy was such that could be measured, then there is no dichotomy between the policy and its implementation. Then you know from day one how it is going to get implemented. That again, the favorite Narega example. You could measure the number of people who are walking in and taking Narega cards. You were measuring real time the number of people who are showing up for work. You were measuring real time the amount of money that was being transferred into those people who are working in rural areas. And therefore, there was no distance to be covered between policy and its implementation. That's why it is so important that to make simple policy work, you have to ensure that the policy direction is clear, the policy urgency is specified, and the policy measurement is written out in black and white. Yeah, I hope that I have made myself clear on this issue as to why it is important to be able to measure policies. Doubling farmers' income by 2022. Great policy, very simple policy. Why? Because obviously it attacks poverty where it exists, and it says very clearly that it will double X to 2X. End of the matter. No ambiguity there. We did not double it by 2020, but at least we are able to measure it and say that we weren't able to double farmers' income. Digital Bharat. Housing for all by 2020. Elimination of Kala Azar by 2025. These are all policies that you will find are very simple, absolutely game-changing policies, because they specify very simply how you will measure, how you will take a unit, measure it and say, yes, well done, A+, or sorry, D-, let's go and attack it again. This is the problem that you will see also in the SDGs. Right? The SDGs, 17 of them, can they all be measured? Now, those who argue for say how each one of those goals is so simply measurable. And that is why they are very clear-cut goals. Each one of those 169 targets that you have under the 17 goals of SDGs are measurable. If you look at an SDG dashboard, you will see where we are faltering. Why are we not meeting our SDGs? Well, COVID came in and completely derailed our efforts. We were not going to achieve it by 2030 in any case. But COVID has pushed it further. Hunger has gone up, poverty has gone up, education has suffered, all of that. But we know where the problems lie. Most of the reasons for us not reaching SDG are located in two states of UP and Bihar. Because we measure, we know where we are going. And that's why I will stop speaking by repeating what Bill Gates kept telling us all the time, that if you cannot measure it, don't do it. I will take questions now. If you can, if there are questions on the chat window, I'll take that. Or if
Yeah, hi. I'm currently studying city planning actually, and
Wonderful.
I have a two-part question regarding this. You talked about like policies need to be measurable, but what about like policies that talk about ways of administration and governance, like the National Transit-Oriented Development Policy? It basically talks about like creating sustainable cities and all of that.
Yeah.
So not all policies would be measurable in those terms, I believe, right? And secondly, about the implementation, sometimes from my research currently, what I've realized is that a lot of the loopholes, the gaps between the intent and the implementation are because of bureaucratic structure. In terms of city planning, creating a metro line or something, the land that is acquired, it comes under so many jurisdictions. The implementation comes under so many jurisdictions that is what is causing a hindrance to the implementation of the policy to its fullest potential.
Yeah. Brilliant, Aditya. While I am not going to specifically tell you the answer for the transit policy because I am no expert on that. What I'm constantly saying is that whatever be the policy, those of you who are the technical experts in that policy will give us a simple unit. You will tell us that the transit policy, the baseline is 0.7. If we reach 3.2 on some scale, we are successful. That's what we want. However you want to, you put a unit to it. Use whatever measure. There are now very, very sophisticated benefit cost analysis methods that can be used to allocate weightages, measure outcomes in any possible manner and turn them into a simple number. Now, there is a danger there. Of course, there is a danger there in that a lot of what is purely qualitative, what is purely intention oriented, might not be exactly measurable, but there has to be some way of putting a number to it. On the bureaucratic issues, yes, of course, we have an ancient, very very slow moving bureaucracy. But my point simply there is that we know that, right? We know that there are zoning laws. We know that there are land use laws. Or when you make a policy that ignores that and then hands it over to a bureaucracy or a public system that should implement it, it cannot, because we haven't tackled that basic problem. And then we make it because we are lazy or we want to get something out quickly. Look at the GST, right? We know that the GST implementation is a problem. Malaysia took 30 years to implement GST. France took 16 years to implement GST. We know we have a complicated tax problem. On that, if we say it's going to get implemented in 3 months and it does not get implemented, it's very easy to say that the Indian Revenue Service is a useless bunch of fellows. But you know that. That's why when you write policy, you have to first indicate where the pitfalls are. Have you taken care of all those pitfalls? That was the reason for Narega. It said that the bureaucracy is there. We have a very corrupt system. There are lots of leakages, and therefore we are going to say nothing. Come, show up for work. Here, take your day's wages. End of the matter. No discretion. Nothing. So that's the reason. And it's an important and a good question you asked. I was shuddering if you were going to ask me a question on smart cities. I don't know the answer. Thank you. Thanks for not asking that. Who else?
Varna?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you, sir, for that very interesting talk. So I've often said, and I believe as well, that policymakers don't take into account the social fabric of the country while making policies. So, for example, recently the minimum legal age for marriage of women was raised to 21. And what we witnessed was a surge in the number of people marrying off their young girls out of sheer panic, right? So at the point at which there's so much emphasis on a measurement, how do you think or how do you suggest that such social realities and values can be taken into account while making policies?
Varna, brilliant point. Let me directly answer that example that you took. I think it's a very stupid law, right? I think it is very silly for us to mandate marriage ages at marriage, right? We've been trying to do that since the Sharda Act for 200 years, and in the 2011 census, we have 12 million girls who get married before the age of 10. So if we are going to mandate the age at marriage, it is bad policy because it doesn't look at the data and it makes a very simplistic answer. Age at marriage has nothing to do with the law. Age at marriage is correlated to education of the girl child. You don't raise ages at marriage by enacting a law. You raise age of marriage by making everybody literate. Why don't people in Kerala get married? Why do people in Rajasthan get married? Why don't the Iranians get married early? The Iranian age at marriage is some 34. It only has to do with the root cause. And once you do that, once you measure that, then you will have an answer. A Ladli policy in Delhi where you incentivize late marriages. That's what works. Not just a law saying you shall not get married before 21. Then you end up in all sorts of problems here. We have a scheme in Telangana where the chief minister gives out earlier 50,000 and now 1 lakh rupees to every girl who gets married at 18. My question to him when we were evaluating that scheme was, sir, why are you giving money for girls to get married? Give them money for not getting married. Give them 1 lakh rupees for every year that they don't get married after 18. Otherwise, everybody is getting married on the day she turns 18. So it's a question of how we incentivize that. And you are absolutely right that, most of this pays absolutely no heed to the fact that as a society, we have a genuine concern. And that is why you're right. The spate of marriages we saw over the last couple of months was horrifying. Next, please.
Aditya Agarwal, and then Bridal and Shuk. Aditya?
I just asked.
Yes, of course. Let me request someone who has not
Should I
asked
go
any
first?
question. No, let's go with Tisha. I'll come back to you.
Okay. Hi,
Yes,
good
Tisha.
evening, sir.
Hi.
So my question is very simple. I just want to understand the difference between a scheme and a policy. Since you've mentioned that a policy should have a clear-cut objective, that to me is quite synonymous to a scheme that is introduced by the government and not a policy. Because policy, in my opinion, is always, I mean, it always has multiple objectives, such as new education policy. I mean, it doesn't address a single cause. So I would just like to understand that.
Brilliant question, Tisha. Very often we use scheme and policy interchangeably, but in the governance parlance, a scheme is one way of implementing a policy. A scheme is one way of incentivizing a particular kind of behavior you want. So a particular irrigation scheme. The policy is to irrigate the country or irrigate a neighborhood. A scheme would be one way of doing it, either by using local check dams or by using borewells or hand pumps or by using large dams. So schemes are in government parlance, direct ways of implementing a particular policy. That's why the midday meal scheme was a way of implementing a policy of providing nourishment to children. That's the simple difference.
Amar?
Good evening, Professor. So,
yes,
as you mentioned earlier, that a good policy, is a policy when there is a clear, simple, measurable objective. So, isn't there a chance that over time that objective gets diluted to what people want it to be? Like you gave the example of Narega, everyone was saying different things, but the actual objective was like to prevent immigrations. Same like in recent times, there's this whole hate against reservation, even though it was to like it was for representation of communities, but now people are hating because they're like it was to give jobs and now they have jobs so they don't need reservation, but that does not equate to representation.
Wonderful question, Amar. Wonderful question, Amar. And that is why one of the simple solutions is to have an end date to a policy. You see, the problem in most of our policies is there is no expiry date. It just goes on and on. And therefore, you say, okay, on so and so date, we will review this policy. And why? How do you review it? You review it when you measure it. Why is there a problem with the reservation issue? You know, one of the things that I must confess on behalf of all my fellow development policy economists, we have not measured the impact of some of our most serious policies. Reservation is one of our most serious indigenous policy in India. Have we measured the impact of reservation? And that is why everybody who has an ideology is going around defending or running it down. If we had measured it, we would say, look, we wanted reservations to achieve 95. We are at 45. We need to go the rest of the distance. Even now, when the policy comes up for discussion, that is what we should base our arguments on. That did we reach the goal of removing untouchability, of removing caste prejudices? I am afraid, that's a separate discussion, but you can take your call on that and actually do your experiments and then argue yes or no. So in everything, we have to argue. HIV/AIDS, we spent $1 billion. I worked on that, so I keep talking about it. Do we need to spend $1 billion now in HIV/AIDS? The prevalence is very low, but we have measured it, and therefore we are saying, okay, here is the measurement. Let's reduce our expenditure on HIV, spend it on TB. That's why it's a good question you ask. Yes, objectives change, and we will know when we have reached our objective, when we have measured.
Thank you.
Abhinav, sorry, I stopped you last time, so this time you have the right to go.
My question was actually very similar to that of Amar, which he
Okay.
asked. So,
All right.
I have one small question though. on what, when you just now said that there should be proper reviewing of objectives on some after some time. My question is on what basis do we review those objectives? Let's take the reservation policy. So
Yeah.
it was
We both know.
sorry.
No, no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah. You were talking about how we measure. Abhinav, the answer is very simple. We are agnostic, right? As those who measure policy success, we are not, as professionals who measure policy success, we are not looking at anything else apart from the metric that you have given. You have said that I am going to enunciate a policy for developing world-class cyclists in India, and in the next 10 years we will get 100 people participating in the Olympics in the cycling event. That's the measure. And we are only going to measure based on that. And we are going to come back and tell you that you said 100, we have achieved 120, congratulations, or we've done 20, terrible policy. So that's the simple way in which we use measurement. So if the objective of reservation was to remove untouchability, we come back to you and say there are 1 million untouchables in India today. So it is not it's a failure. Either you review the policy or you extend the policy. That's the benefit of measurement. For all of you who have asked me,
as you just said,
yeah,
when you measure a policy, that policy would have some predetermined objective set, say at some X time.
Correct.
Now,
Correct.
when we measure that same policy in current time, those objectives may or may not be relevant at the current time. So how can we measure the objective that was set, say 80, 90, say 100 years ago? Now when we measure it and then say, okay, did we eradicate this? Probably yes. On a major scale, we don't see untouchability in at least in metro cities. At least I have never encountered untouchability in my life until now. 20 years of life, I have never encountered it. So I can probably say yes, it is success. For someone else, it might not be success.
So despite your best efforts, Abhinav, I am not getting into a debate on reservation. It's a wonderful area. We will do that some other day. The simple objective here, as I said, is that even if it was 100 years ago, what did the objective say? Did it say removal of untouchability? If you can measure it and say that, yes, there is no untouchability today, off with it. If it said no, it is to remove all caste differences, if it is to correct past mistakes, whatever, then if that question is yes, then continue. If the answer is that no, we have tackled A and not B, and the reason we should continue, or the reason that, or the problem that we have is C, then let C be the new objective. The point is not whether that policy, whether we stick to that policy or not, etc. The point is that how are we going to measure, how are we going to monitor, and how are we going to alter a policy that has existed for so long. Nutrition, you see, the food policy, public distribution system, what was it supposed to do? To provide food security to everyone, to provide 2000 calories to everyone. Did it serve that purpose? Yes. But the externality there, or the collateral damage there, was that it induced enormous amount of malnutrition. So what do we do now? Now we ensure that we have fortified food. That's how we change the policy. But when we change the policy, we have a new method. We say that now we won't measure 2000 calories. Now we will measure whether people are malnourished or not. So that's the issue. I am very intrigued by Krishna Agarwal's question on how our policy is affected with change of government or political will. Very good question, Krishna. Obviously, it is going to get affected, and that's the whole nature of democracy, that it should get affected, because when we are electing a new government, we are electing a government that has different policies and different objectives and different ideologies that we want imposed on us. So there will be change. But if you follow this basic principle, that we are going to have a policy for cricket where the measurable thing is that we will continue with playing cricket till we win the test championship. Then whether a new government comes or not, whether Jay Shah becomes the president of BCCI or not, we will continue to play cricket till we win that test championship. So that's the beauty about putting a simple measure and a simple objective, that then it won't matter whether government change or not. Of course, you can have a government come and change and say that, sorry, that's a stupid objective and take it away, which is also fine, which is also a democratic way of doing it. But then it is slightly more difficult. So it's a very interesting question that you've asked, Diksha. I think the policy is successful or not is something that I have talked about, that it will be successful if it has reached if you have decided that you will get 80% marks in physics, you are successful if you've got 80%, and anything less than that, you are unsuccessful. That's can there be more than one objective? Dhwani, that's a very good question. Can there be more than one objective? My simple, archaic academic answer is no. There cannot be two objectives. Each policy should have one objective. Our whole bane of our policy making has been that we did a policy for we have a policy for increasing for developing roads, and people said, oh, so how will it reduce hunger? What will it do to women? How will it impact small and medium scale enterprises? No, our policy is just to make the road better. Whether it does other things or not, we don't care. If that policy objective is wrong, let's not do it. So therefore, we should simply insist that there should be one objective. If there are externalities, if there are other objectives that are achieved, very good, excellent. And with every good policy, that's what has happened, right? The RTE, what it did was that while it did get a lot of children into school, it also made children healthier. It also reduced fertility rates. So it can happen, but those are purely externalities that have come about as without wanting them to, and that cannot be held to either their discredit or their credit. What, according to me, Vishakha, is a policy that India urgently needs to undertake? That was my final question to all of you. What do you think is a policy we should take up? I have several, but I think right now, in my list of things, we need a policy that tackles unemployment. We have unprecedented unemployment. I see all of you. You are all lucky and you're all very smart. You will get a job, but there are millions like you who won't. And that's a tragedy. I'll stop here, Ipshita. I have taken 5 more minutes than you gave me.
Yes, I know that there are many questions, and there are always going to be questions for a session like this, Professor Amir. We always anticipated that. You must have seen the vast canvas that Professor Amir painted, and there's always a response because of not just his experience, but his very critical engagement with a range of issues. So thank you very much, Professor Amir, for bringing that forth to the winter school. I hope that this session actually leaves you with a lot of questions. I'm glad that there are so many hands raised, because that is the whole idea. The idea is to get you interested. The idea is to get you thinking. There wouldn't be an A and 2 + 2, 4 answers to the kind of questions you ask. And perhaps that is the success of Professor Amir in stimulating you to think about these questions and maybe find answers yourselves. I saw some very interesting questions that you have put. Think about those, find your solutions, and I would implore you to take this opportunity. Maybe you could come back to any of the other speakers and ask those questions, because the sessions we have tried to maintain a degree of interconnectedness between them. So thank you very much, Professor Amir. It's always pleasure listening to you. Thanks a lot for taking time out. I know you have been very busy, but still you took out time. You offered to help with this, and it is one message, and the offer was taken, as you can see. So
thank you so much, Ipshita. Thanks, everybody. It's been wonderful talking to all of you. Bye.
Bye-bye. So thanks to all the participants for joining in for the session. I hope that it was a good learning experience for all of you. And as I said, that I hope it left you with a lot of questions. Let us seek some answers tomorrow. And by the end of this winter course, I hope that we leave with, even more questions, than we came with. Okay. But maybe an instrument, a tool, and a way to think through these questions, right? 3 days are never enough to answer all the questions, but 3 days should be good enough to give you the kind of perspective, to give you the, to give you the wherewithal to how to seek answers to these questions. Okay. Thank you very much for your attendance and for your participation. This is very nice to see, very, very nice to see so many questions being asked. You have asked for certain reading materials. Yes, we are putting together a whole set of reading for each of the sessions, and we would be happy to share with them. For remaining connected with the professors, one Google and you will know who all these people are. The professors of this particular school, they are all available on emails, and it is all available on the websites. Professor Amir also very much very tech savvy, always on the net. So you can find out, but I will also alert you that a lot of these people are also very busy people. So they might not be able to respond to your query immediately. But I guess that, again, to reiterate, at the end of the school, you may you have the skills which is required to answer some questions, and may you also have the interest to join the course to learn more about this. Okay. Thank you very much once again. The attendance will be recorded by Zoom. Zoom does all that homework for us. So we are quite pros at managing Zoom attendance now, doing it for the last 2 years or so. Yeah. Thank you so much. See you again tomorrow. Okay. Bye-bye. Logging off.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yep.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Akshita ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.